Some jobs should never be done after midnight. "3 hours. 4 night shifts. And 4 people who discovered something waiting in the dark after midnight that they were never supposed to find." There is a phone in a sealed hospital room in Chicago that has been disconnected for over a year. The wiring melted during a fire. The cables were removed. The room was locked and left to rot. Tonight, at exactly 3:11 a.m., it rings. There is a train line in the Oregon mountains that was officially shut down after every passenger died in a blizzard. The tracks are gone. The station is abandoned. The route no longer exists on any map. Tonight, just after 1:43 a.m., something arrives at the platform. There is a cubicle on the 7th floor of an Atlanta office building that nobody has used in 6 years. The computer is unplugged. The phone line is dead. The desk sits empty under flickering lights. Tonight, at exactly 3:33 a.m., it rings too, and on a Nevada desert highway at mile marker 117, a stretch of road built over the dead, something walks between the crash victims after 2 a.m. Something tall. Something patient. Something that doesn't need to run to catch you. These are 4 stories about people who worked the night shift. People who did everything right. Who showed up. Who stayed awake. Who ignored the things they were supposed to ignore, until the night they couldn't anymore. Before we go into the dark together, if you're watching this now, alone, while rain hits your window and the hallway outside your room has gone quiet, hit the like button. Let us know you're here. Let us know someone made it this far before the stories begin. Share this video with someone brave enough to listen through the night. Send it without warning. Midnight. No context. Let them discover what's waiting the same way these 4 people did, one shift at a time. Subscribe to Shadow's Lair and press that bell icon to get notifications, because every week we go deeper into the places people refuse to work after dark. Into the legends that night workers whisper at 3 a.m. when they think nobody else is listening. Into the hours the world was never meant to witness. Be the first to listen. Done. Good. Then turn off the lights. Keep the rain close. And whatever you do tonight, don't answer it. There's something deeply unnatural about being awake when the rest of the world sleeps. The most terrifying part about the night shift is realizing the world does not feel empty after midnight. It feels occupied. At 2:17 a.m., when highways are deserted, when hospital corridors fall silent, when office lights flicker over rows of empty cubicles, something changes in the atmosphere. The air feels heavier. Hallways seem longer than they did during the day. Elevators stop at floors nobody pressed. Phones ring from abandoned rooms. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the last streetlight, something watches the few people still awake. Night shift workers know this feeling better than anyone. Security guards sitting alone in buildings that should be empty. Nurses hearing footsteps in sealed hospital wings. Truck drivers spotting figures standing motionless on forgotten roads at impossible hours of the night. Railway operators hearing voices over dead radio frequencies. Call center employees answering calls from people who officially no longer exist. Most nights are ordinary. Most nights are harmless. But every person who has worked the graveyard shift long enough eventually experiences something they can never fully explain. Something small at first. A shadow standing where nobody should be. A door slowly opening by itself. A face caught for 1 second in the reflection of dark glass. The sound of someone whispering your name. In a building where you are completely alone. And the worst part is this: exhaustion makes you question your own sanity. Did you actually see it? Did you imagine it? Or did something notice you during those lonely hours between midnight and sunrise? Because there is something deeply unnatural about being awake when the rest of the world sleeps. It feels like humans were never meant to witness these hours. Like after a certain time of night. The world belongs to something else. Something older. Something patient. Something that waits quietly in empty hospitals, abandoned stations, silent office buildings, and endless desert highways for the tired. Isolated workers unlucky enough to still be awake. Tonight's stories are inspired by the hidden fears buried inside real night jobs: isolation, silence, guilt, exhaustion, paranoia, and the horrifying realization that sometimes you are not as alone as you think you are. These are not stories about monsters hiding under beds. These are stories about fluorescent lights humming in empty corridors. About footsteps echoing behind you during a 3 a.m. patrol. About hearing a voice through a headset when nobody is supposed to be on the other end. About seeing someone standing beside the road at an hour when no human being should possibly be there. 4 stories. 4 night shifts. For moments where ordinary people discovered something terrifying waiting in the darkness after midnight. So before we begin, lock your doors. Turn off the lights. And if you work nights, you may want to listen very carefully. Because after tonight, every late shift, every empty hallway, every ringing phone, and every shadow in the corner of your vision may start to feel different. These are 4 night shift horrors. Story 1. The Third Floor Call. A private hospital in Chicago, USA, 3:11 a.m. Daniel Reyes had worked night security at St. Augustine Medical Center for nearly 4 years, and somewhere during those endless overnight shifts, fear had slowly rotted out of him. Hospitals had a way of doing that. The first few months, every noise made him jump. Every dark hallway felt threatening. Every late-night emergency carried this invisible tension that clung to the walls long after the patient was gone. But eventually, your mind adapted. It had to. Otherwise the building would drive you insane. Daniel stopped fearing the dark pediatric wing with its faded cartoon murals and empty cribs. He stopped fearing the old surgical hallway where motion sensor lights flickered on seconds too late. He stopped fearing the elevators that led to the morgue in the basement, elevators that occasionally opened on their own at impossible hours despite nobody calling them. After a while, all hospitals began to feel the same after midnight. Cold. Endless. Breathing. Because hospitals were alive in ways ordinary buildings were not. Machines beeped in distant rooms like mechanical heartbeats. Oxygen lines hissed softly inside walls. Pipes groaned overhead like something shifting in the ceiling. Wheelchairs squeaked slowly down corridors pushed by exhausted nurses whose faces looked ghostly beneath fluorescent lights. And sometimes, there were sounds nobody could explain. Soft knocking behind sealed rooms. Footsteps echoing through empty wards. Whispers heard over dead intercoms. But night shift workers survived by learning one important rule: you ignored things. You ignored the sounds. Ignored the shadows in your peripheral vision. Ignored the feeling that someone was standing behind you in empty hallways. Because if you acknowledged every strange thing inside a hospital after 3 a.m., you would never make it through the night. Daniel's shift started every evening at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 in the morning. Same routine. Check security cameras. Patrol each floor. Log incidents. Drink stale coffee that tasted burned no matter where it came from. Stay awake long enough to watch sunrise crawl through the windows. Most nights were painfully boring. That Wednesday night began exactly the same. Too normal. Rain slammed violently against the hospital windows while cold wind moaned outside the building. Downtown Chicago glowed through sheets of fog and reflected neon, the city looking distant and unreal beneath the storm. Inside St. Augustine Medical Center, the overnight skeleton crew moved quietly through dim corridors. A handful of nurses. 2 doctors. 1 janitor somewhere on the lower floors. By 2:45 a.m., the hospital became unnaturally silent. No emergency arrivals. No overhead announcements. No alarms. Even the usual sounds seemed muted somehow, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Daniel sat alone in the security office staring lazily at security monitors while rubbing exhaustion from his eyes. Half the camera feeds showed empty hallways bathed in pale fluorescent light. The other half flickered occasionally with static caused by the storm outside. His untouched coffee had already gone cold beside him. Then the desk phone rang. One loud, sharp ring exploded through the silence so suddenly it made Daniel flinch. Then silence returned immediately afterward. He stared at the phone. The ringing hadn't sounded normal. It had sounded aggressive. Urgent. Like someone slamming metal against glass. Daniel frowned and looked down at the caller ID screen. His stomach tightened slightly. Internal line, 3rd floor, room 317. He immediately recognized the room number. Everyone who worked nights recognized it. Room 317 had been sealed for months after an electrical fire killed a patient during a winter blackout. Officially, the room was under renovation. Unofficially, staff avoided talking about it. Nurses refused assignments near that wing during overnight hours. Janitors cleaned around it as quickly as possible. Even experienced doctors seemed uncomfortable mentioning the room. Daniel stared at the blinking phone for several long seconds before finally answering. Security. Static answered him immediately. Loud. Harsh. Like radio interference buried beneath deep water. Daniel frowned harder. Hello. Then he heard breathing. Wet breathing. Slow. Uneven. Like someone struggling to pull air through fluid-filled lungs. The sound was intimate and horrifyingly close to the receiver. Daniel sat upright instantly. Hello. Who is this? The breathing continued. Thick. Bubbling slightly. followed by a faint crackling noise in the background that almost sounded like distant fire. Daniel's skin prickled. If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. Silence. Then a voice emerged from the static. A woman's voice. Weak. Trembling. Barely human. Please. Daniel froze. The voice sounded as though it were coming through layers of water and ash. Please come upstairs. A horrible choking sound followed, wet and painful, as though the speaker's throat were burned raw. Then the line abruptly died. Silence flooded the room again. Daniel slowly lowered the receiver while staring at the caller ID screen. Room 317. Rain hammered harder against the windows outside. Somewhere deep in the hospital, a metal cart clanged loudly enough to make Daniel jump. He swallowed uneasily and turned toward the security monitors. Camera feed, 3rd floor East Wing. The corridor outside room 317 appeared empty. Pale fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead. Nothing moved. No nurses. No patients. No sign of life anywhere. Yet something about the hallway looked wrong tonight. The lights seemed dimmer than usual. The shadows darker. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. For one brief second, he thought he saw movement near the end of the corridor. A figure standing motionless beside room 317. Tall. Thin. But the camera flickered with static and the shape vanished immediately. Daniel felt a cold sensation crawl slowly down his spine. He grabbed the radio beside him and pressed the button. 3rd floor nurse station, you guys call security. Static crackled softly before a tired nurse answered. No. Why? Daniel hesitated. He almost mentioned room 317. Almost told her about the call. But hearing himself say it out loud suddenly felt ridiculous. Nothing, he muttered. Thought I heard something. The nurse sounded distracted. Well, nobody's up here except me and Sandra. Daniel ended the radio call, but unease continued gnawing at him. Hospitals were strange places. Phones malfunctioned all the time. Old wiring. Storm interference. Faulty systems. That's what he told himself. But deep down, another memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in months. The patient who died in room 317 had not died peacefully. During the blackout fire, nurses reportedly heard her screaming for help from inside the smoke-filled room while electronic locks malfunctioned. By the time staff forced the door open, there was almost nothing left to save. Daniel remembered the rumors afterward. Staff hearing crying from the sealed room late at night. Elevator buttons randomly lighting up for the 3rd floor. Security cameras glitching near the East Wing after 3 a.m. He had ignored all of it. Because that's what night workers did. They ignored things. But then the phone rang again. This time louder. Longer. Violent enough that Daniel nearly knocked over his coffee. The caller ID still read, room 317. And before Daniel could even touch the receiver, the security monitor for the 3rd floor hallway suddenly went black. Nothing answered him at first. Only static. Thick, crackling static that sounded less like electronic interference and more like distant fire burning inside the walls of the hospital. Then, very softly, a whisper emerged through the receiver. Weak. Wet. Trembling with pain. Please come upstairs. The voice sounded wrong in a way Daniel couldn't immediately explain. It didn't sound like a person speaking through a phone line. It sounded like someone trapped somewhere deep underwater, trying to scream through flooded lungs. Before Daniel could respond, the line abruptly disconnected with a loud burst of static that made him jerk the phone away from his ear. Silence returned to the security office instantly. Heavy, suffocating silence. Daniel slowly lowered the receiver back onto its cradle while staring at the glowing caller ID screen. Room 317. His stomach tightened. He knew that room. Everyone on the overnight staff knew that room. Even people who pretended not to believe in ghost stories lowered their voices whenever they mentioned it. Room 317 had been sealed for nearly 7 months after a patient died there during a winter power outage that turned into a nightmare. The official report blamed faulty emergency wiring. But the nurses who had been working that night told a different story. They said the patient had been alive while smoke filled the room. They said they could hear her screaming for help from the hallway while the electronic door locks malfunctioned. By the time maintenance finally forced the door open, the fire had already consumed most of the room. Nobody spoke openly about what they found inside afterward. Daniel glanced toward the wall of security monitors, suddenly unable to shake the cold sensation crawling slowly up the back of his neck. He pulled up camera feed, 3rd floor east wing. The corridor appeared completely empty beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Pale green walls stretched endlessly into silence. Wheelchairs sat parked neatly beside the nurse's station. Doors remained closed. No movement. No staff. No patients wandering the halls. Nothing. Yet something about the footage unsettled him immediately. The hallway looked darker than usual tonight. The shadows near room 317 seemed unnaturally thick, almost swallowing the weak overhead lights around them. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. The camera image briefly twitched with static. And for the smallest fraction of a second, he thought he saw someone standing at the end of the corridor. Tall. Motionless. Facing the camera. But the image corrected itself instantly, leaving the hallway empty again. Daniel swallowed hard and reached for his radio. 3rd floor nurse station, anybody call security? A burst of static answered before a tired female voice replied almost immediately. No. Why? Daniel hesitated. He could suddenly hear how ridiculous it would sound if he explained the phone call. Nothing, he muttered. Thought I heard something. The nurse sounded distracted and exhausted. Nobody's here except me and Sandra. Daniel ended the transmission and sat back slowly, rubbing tiredness from his eyes. The storm outside hammered harder against the hospital windows now. Rain streaked down the glass in distorted patterns while distant thunder rolled through the city. Somewhere far down the corridor outside the security office, a metal cart squeaked slowly across tile flooring before stopping abruptly. Daniel looked toward the doorway. Empty. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Hospitals played tricks on people during night shifts. Long hours. Lack of sleep. Endless fluorescent lighting. Your brain eventually began filling silence with things that weren't there. That's what he told himself. But deep down, something still felt horribly wrong about the call. He should have ignored it. That was the first rule of working overnight security in a hospital. Ignore strange things and finish your shift. Don't investigate every sound. Don't chase shadows. Don't let curiosity pull you into places better left alone. But night shifts create dangerous curiosity, especially around 3 a.m., when exhaustion blurs the line between logic and instinct. 5 minutes later, Daniel found himself standing in front of the elevator at the end of the security hallway. The stainless steel doors reflected pale fluorescent light across his tired face while rainwater rattled violently against distant windows. He pressed the button. The elevator arrived almost immediately with a low metallic groan. Empty. Daniel stepped inside and turned toward the control panel. Then he froze. The button for floor 3 was already glowing red. Someone had selected it before he entered. Daniel frowned and looked around the empty elevator car. No one else inside. No sound except the low mechanical hum vibrating through the walls. Slowly, he pressed the button again. The light flickered strangely beneath his finger but remained illuminated. The doors slid shut with a heavy metallic thud that echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, Daniel considered stepping back out. Something deep inside him suddenly screamed that going upstairs was a mistake. But before he could react, the elevator began ascending. Slowly. Too slowly. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly while the floor indicator blinked upward. Floor 1. The elevator creaked softly. Floor 2. The hum inside the walls deepened into a low grinding noise. Then suddenly, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Hard enough to plunge the elevator into complete darkness for half a second each time. Daniel's pulse quickened immediately. The emergency lights failed to activate during the flickers, leaving him blind inside suffocating blackness before the pale fluorescent glow returned. The elevator jerked violently beneath his feet. Then stopped moving altogether. Silence. Total silence. Daniel looked toward the floor indicator. Nothing displayed anymore. No floor number. No emergency warning. Just darkness behind the plastic panel. The air inside the elevator suddenly felt colder. Much colder. Daniel pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again harder. Still nothing. Then, from somewhere behind him inside the elevator, he heard it. Breathing. Wet breathing. Slow. Uneven. Like lungs struggling through liquid. Daniel's entire body locked in place. The sound was unmistakable. Someone else was inside the elevator with him. Very slowly, he turned around. The elevator was empty. But the breathing continued. Closer now. Right behind his shoulder. And then the lights flickered again. This time, during the split second of darkness, Daniel saw a silhouette standing directly beside him. Tall. Burned. Motionless. When the lights snapped back on, the figure was gone. But a wet handprint now stained the mirrored elevator wall beside him. Fresh. Blackened. Smelling faintly of smoke. Then the elevator began moving upward again by itself. Toward the 3rd floor. The elevator suddenly stopped so hard that Daniel nearly lost his balance. The violent jolt rattled the walls around him, followed by a deep metallic groan echoing somewhere above the ceiling. He looked immediately toward the floor indicator expecting to see the glowing number 3. Instead, the display was blank. Completely dead. The elevator hadn't reached the 3rd floor. It had stopped between floors. Daniel muttered a curse beneath his breath while pressing the control buttons repeatedly, but none of them responded. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed weakly, flickering with unstable electricity as the elevator sat motionless in suffocating silence. Then he heard it. A woman crying. Soft at first. Barely audible beneath the hum of the stalled elevator. Daniel froze instantly. The crying sounded very close. Too close. Not somewhere outside the elevator shaft. Inside the elevator with him. He turned sharply, his flashlight beam slicing across the cramped metal walls. Nobody there. Empty corners. Empty floor. Empty reflections in the mirrored panels. But the crying continued. Quiet, broken sobbing filled with unbearable pain. Wet choking breaths between each cry. And somehow the sound had moved. It was now directly behind him. Daniel spun around so quickly his shoulder slammed into the wall. Nothing. Still nobody. Yet the crying grew louder, trembling through the elevator like the sound itself was breathing against his neck. The overhead lights suddenly died completely. Darkness swallowed the elevator. One heartbeat later, emergency lights activated with a harsh electrical click. Red. Deep crimson emergency lighting flooded the cramped elevator interior, turning the metal walls black and blood-colored. Every reflection looked distorted now. Wrong. Daniel's own face appeared pale and corpse-like in the mirrored surfaces around him. The crying slowly changed into whispering. Multiple whispers layered over one another. Female voices overlapping softly in the darkness. He left me. It hurts. So cold. Please. Daniel's heartbeat slammed violently against his ribs. He pressed himself against the elevator wall while frantically hammering the emergency button over and over again. Come on. The elevator suddenly jolted so hard the lights flickered again. For one horrifying second during the flicker, Daniel saw a woman standing inches away from him beneath the red emergency glow. Burned black skin hung from her face in melted strips. White hospital bracelets fused into charred flesh around her wrist. Her jaw hung slightly open as smoke drifted slowly from her mouth. Then the light stabilized. The woman vanished. But the smell remained. Burned flesh. Thick and oily. Filling the tiny elevator space until Daniel gagged. A loud mechanical clang echoed through the shaft above them. Then the elevator resumed moving upward by itself. Slowly. Grinding painfully against unseen machinery. The whispering stopped instantly. Silence returned. But it wasn't comforting silence anymore. It felt expectant. Like something waiting. Ding. The elevator doors slid open. Daniel immediately knew something was wrong. The entire third-floor corridor outside was completely dark. Not dimly lit. Not partially powered down. Completely black. That should not have been possible. Hospitals never shut lights off entirely. Emergency systems alone would have illuminated at least part of the hallway. Yet beyond the elevator doors stretched only darkness. Endless darkness swallowing the corridor whole. Daniel hesitated before stepping out slowly, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The beam cut through the blackness in thin pale streaks, revealing drifting dust particles floating through stale air. The hallway looked abandoned for decades rather than months. Dust coated the floor. Paint peeled from walls in long curling strips. Wheelchairs sat motionless against the walls like silent figures waiting in the dark. The usual sounds of the hospital were gone. No machines. No distant conversations. No intercom announcements. Nothing. The silence felt unnatural. Dead. Daniel swallowed hard and slowly moved forward. His flashlight beam swept across room doors, each one slightly ajar as though someone had opened them recently. Inside the rooms, darkness pressed heavily against the windows. Then his flashlight reached the far end of the corridor. Room 317. Daniel stopped breathing. The door was open. It had never been opened before. A faint flickering light glowed weakly from inside the room, pulsing softly like candlelight even though hospitals didn't use candles. The light flickered against the walls in strange uneven patterns, casting long shadows into the hallway. Daniel felt every instinct inside him screaming to leave immediately. But before he could move, his radio crackled violently at his hip. The sudden sound made him jump. Daniel? The nurse downstairs. Her voice sounded distorted through heavy static. Distant. Frightened. Daniel grabbed the radio quickly. Yeah. Even to himself, his voice sounded wrong now. Thin. Weak. Like the building itself was draining something out of him. Static crackled loudly for several seconds before the nurse spoke again, this time quieter. Nervous. Listen. You need to come back down. Daniel kept staring at room 317 while tightening his grip on the flashlight. The flickering light inside the room suddenly dimmed for a moment before brightening again. Why? Silence answered him. Not normal radio silence. Heavy silence filled with faint interference and distant crackling sounds. Then Daniel heard something else through the radio beneath the static. Breathing. Wet breathing. The same breathing from the phone call. The nurse finally spoke again, her voice trembling badly now. Daniel. More static swallowed her words briefly. The cameras. Daniel's stomach tightened instantly. What about them? Silence again. Long enough for Daniel to hear his own heartbeat. Then the nurse whispered something that made cold terror spread through every part of his body. You never got off the elevator. Then the nurse finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling so badly it almost dissolved beneath the static. Because nobody's been on the third floor for 20 minutes. Daniel frowned immediately, confusion cutting through his fear for a brief second. What do you mean? The radio crackled violently. Somewhere behind the interference, he thought he could hear distant screaming buried beneath the static. Then the nurse answered in a shaken, breathless voice. The cameras. A long pause followed. Daniel could hear her breathing hard on the other end now. They show you standing completely still in the elevator. The words hit him like ice water poured directly into his chest. Daniel's stomach dropped violently. What? His flashlight beam trembled against the walls as the nurse continued speaking rapidly, panic growing in her voice. You never got off. Daniel, you're still inside the elevator. You've been standing there the entire time. Cold terror spread through him so suddenly it almost stole the strength from his legs. Slowly, painfully slowly, Daniel turned around toward where the elevator should have been. His flashlight beam swept across empty darkness. The elevator doors were gone. The hallway entrance behind him was gone. There was no corridor leading back to safety. No glowing elevator panel. No emergency lights. Nothing. Just endless blackness stretching behind him like a bottomless void swallowing the hospital whole. Daniel's breathing became shallow instantly. His flashlight flickered weakly in his hand, the beam pulsing unevenly as though the battery were dying despite being fully charged less than an hour earlier. The darkness behind him didn't look normal. It looked thick. Alive somehow. Like a giant open space waiting for him to step inside. The nurse's terrified voice crackled through the radio again. Daniel. Static exploded loudly between every word. Who are you talking to? Daniel slowly turned back toward room 317. And froze. A silhouette now stood inside the room. Tall. Perfectly motionless. A woman wearing a hospital gown stained dark along the front. Her body stood unnaturally still in the flickering light while her head tilted sharply to one side at an angle no human neck should bend. Daniel couldn't breathe. The flickering light from inside the room pulsed softly across her figure, revealing thin smoke drifting upward from her skin. The smell hit him a second later. Burned flesh. Sweet and rotten. Thick enough to coat the inside of his throat. His radio suddenly hissed with violent static so loud he nearly dropped it. Then another voice emerged through the interference. Wet. Broken. Choking with pain. He left me. Daniel felt his knees weaken instantly. The woman inside room 317 moved. One slow step forward into the corridor light. The sound her bare feet made against the floor was horribly wet. Flesh peeling softly with each movement. Daniel finally saw her face clearly. Burned skin hung from her cheeks in melted strips exposing blackened muscle beneath. Parts of her jawbone showed through cracked flesh. One side of her scalp had burned completely away, revealing patches of charred skull beneath thin strands of wet hair. Her eyes were the worst part. Completely white. No pupils. No irises. Just pale dead eyes staring directly into him without blinking. Hospital identification bracelets had fused into the burned flesh around both wrists, partially melted into her skin during the fire. Daniel instantly recognized her from old hospital photos shown during staff safety meetings after the blackout incident. The patient from room 317. The woman who died screaming while smoke filled her lungs and emergency systems failed around her. But then Daniel noticed something even worse. She wasn't alone. Slowly, more shapes became visible behind her inside the room as the flickering light shifted. Dozens of figures stood silently within the darkness of room 317. Patients. Burn victims. Men and women wearing scorched hospital gowns. Some attached to dangling 4 lines that trailed across the floor like rotting veins. Others with blackened skin split open across their faces and arms. One elderly man stood with half his chest burned completely away, exposing charred ribs beneath melted flesh. A young nurse stood near the back with empty eye sockets leaking thick black fluid down her cheeks. Another patient still sat inside a burned wheelchair. Fingers fused permanently around the armrests. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They simply stared at Daniel in total silence. Pale dead faces illuminated by the weak flickering glow from inside the room. Daniel realized with growing horror that many of them looked far older than the hospital fire victims. Some wore outdated hospital gowns from decades earlier. One man even wore an oxygen mask attached to rusted tubing that no longer existed in modern hospitals. The room behind them no longer looked like a hospital room either. It looked endless. Dark walls stretching impossibly deep into shadows where more shapes moved slowly in the distance. Daniel's flashlight flickered harder now, dimming with each pulse of light. And every single time the beam weakened, the figures inside room 317 appeared slightly closer. The burned woman tilted her head farther sideways until bones cracked audibly beneath ruined flesh. Then she smiled. Her lips split apart unnaturally wide, exposing blackened teeth fused together from heat damage. When she spoke again, multiple voices came out at once. Male, female, elderly, childlike, all layered together inside one broken whisper. Stay with us. The overhead hallway lights suddenly exploded in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed the corridor instantly. And inside the blackness surrounding Daniel, dozens of voices began whispering his name. All of them were watching him. Not blinking. Not breathing. Just standing shoulder to shoulder inside the impossible darkness of room 317 while the weak flickering light illuminated their ruined faces in violent flashes. The burned woman at the front slowly smiled wider. Daniel heard bones crack inside her jaw as her mouth stretched far beyond what human skin should allow. Burned flesh tore softly at the corners of her lips. Black fluid dripped from her teeth onto the floor. Then she whispered again in that layered voice made of many different people speaking at once. Stay with us. The hallway lights exploded. Every fluorescent fixture above Daniel burst simultaneously with deafening pops, showering sparks across the corridor before total darkness swallowed everything. Daniel screamed and stumbled backward instinctively as the building vanished around him. Not dimness. Not shadows. Complete blackness. The kind that feels thick against your skin. The kind that makes you forget where your own body ends. Then came the sounds. Wet footsteps. Whispering. Crying. And somewhere inside the darkness around him, dozens of voices began speaking his name at once. Daniel's survival instinct finally shattered whatever paralysis terror had trapped him in. He ran. Blind panic overtook every rational thought in his mind as he sprinted through the darkness, flashlight beam bouncing violently through endless corridors that no longer resembled the hospital he knew. The hallway behind him erupted with movement. Bare feet slapping rapidly against tile flooring. Fast. Wet. Desperate. Not one set of footsteps. Many. Dozens. Daniel nearly slipped while turning a corner, his flashlight revealing flashes of impossible things as he ran. Hospital beds sitting abandoned in the middle of corridors. For stands moving slowly by themselves. Doors appearing suddenly where blank walls should have been. Some doors hung open revealing patient rooms filled with motionless figures staring silently from darkness as he passed. Others revealed impossible spaces beyond them, endless black hallways stretching far deeper than the building itself. Daniel's breathing became ragged and painful as panic consumed him completely. The hospital no longer obeyed reality. Corridors stretched impossibly long ahead of him. Ceiling lights flickered overhead in violent bursts, sometimes revealing figures standing only inches away before plunging everything back into darkness. Somewhere behind him, the sound of bare feet kept getting closer. He could hear whispering directly beside his ears now. Cold fingers brushing lightly against the back of his neck. Then suddenly, through the darkness ahead, Daniel saw elevator doors. Bright silver beneath flickering emergency lights. Relief slammed through him so hard it almost made his knees buckle. He sprinted toward them without slowing. The elevator doors opened immediately before he even reached the button. Daniel threw himself forward, then froze. A little boy stood inside the elevator. Maybe 8 years old. Dead pale skin. Hollow eyes ringed with dark bruising. He wore an oversized hospital patient gown stained yellow with age. In one tiny hand, he held a faded red balloon that floated motionlessly beside him despite the lack of airflow. The boy stared at Daniel silently for several long seconds before speaking in a soft whisper. "Don't go in there." Daniel's chest heaved violently while sweat ran down his face. "What?" Behind him, the sounds in the hallway grew louder. Wet footsteps slapping rapidly against tile. Whispering voices multiplying in the darkness. The little boy slowly pointed downward toward the lower floors. His expression never changed. "Use the stairs." The balloon string tightened slowly in his hand as though something unseen above the elevator was pulling it upward. Daniel suddenly noticed burn scars covering the boy's wrists beneath the hospital gown sleeves. Before Daniel could say another word, the elevator doors slammed shut violently. The little boy vanished behind the closing metal doors along with the red balloon. Daniel stood frozen for half a second. Then he slowly turned around. And nearly screamed. The corridor behind him was no longer empty. Dozens of patients now filled the hallway from wall to wall, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering lights. Burned men. Nurses with broken necks. Elderly patients dragging 4 tubes behind them. Children in stained hospital gowns. Wheelchair-bound figures whose heads twitched unnaturally sideways. Some had skin melted away from their faces. Others looked bloated and gray like drowned corpses. One old man stood with half his jaw missing while black fluid leaked slowly down his chest. Every single one of them stared directly at Daniel without blinking. The hallway fell completely silent. Then, one by one, their mouths slowly opened together. Daniel expected screaming. Instead, the sound that erupted from them was mechanical. Broken. A deafening shriek like hundreds of hospital monitors flatlining at once. The noise tore through the corridor so violently Daniel felt blood rush from his ears. It sounded electronic and human at the same time. Endless suffering trapped inside machine static. The dead patients suddenly lurched forward together. Daniel ran. He sprinted blindly toward the stairwell door at the end of the corridor while the screaming followed directly behind him. Hands clawed at the walls. Wheelchairs slammed violently against tile. The sound of dragging feet and snapping bones echoed through the hallway as the dead chased him through darkness. Daniel reached the stairwell and slammed his shoulder against the heavy metal door hard enough to nearly dislocate it. The second he stumbled inside, the door exploded shut behind him with a deafening metallic crash. Silence. Instant. Complete silence. Daniel nearly collapsed from the sudden absence of sound. No footsteps. No whispers. No screaming. Only the harsh sound of his own ragged breathing echoing through the stairwell. He didn't stop moving. He stumbled downward as fast as his shaking legs allowed, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. 3rd floor. 2nd floor. 1st floor. The fluorescent stairwell lights flickered weakly overhead while his footsteps echoed violently around him. Every few seconds he looked upward expecting to see figures standing on the stairs above him. But nothing followed. Still. The feeling remained. The overwhelming certainty that something was watching him descend. Waiting. Daniel finally burst through the ground floor stairwell door and nearly collapsed onto polished tile flooring. bright light blinded him instantly. Warm fluorescent lobby lighting flooded across his face. The normal sounds of the hospital crashed into him all at once: ringing phones, distant conversations, rolling carts, overhead announcements. Nurses standing near reception immediately rushed toward him in alarm. "Daniel! Oh my God, what happened? Are you hurt?" Daniel stumbled backward against the reception desk, shaking uncontrollably. His uniform was drenched in sweat. His flashlight hung loosely from numb fingers. One nurse grabbed his shoulders while another called for water. But Daniel couldn't answer them. Couldn't even process their voices. Because his eyes had locked onto the large digital clock mounted above the reception area. 7:02 a.m. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. No. That wasn't possible. He had entered the elevator shortly after 3 a.m. He remembered every second. Every hallway. Every scream. Every impossible thing he had seen. Yet according to the clock, nearly 4 hours had passed. 4 entire hours gone. Vanished. But for Daniel, it had felt like barely 20 minutes. And somewhere deep above them in the silent upper floors of St. Augustine Medical Center, a phone began ringing again. Daniel Reyes never returned to St. Augustine Medical Center after that night. According to hospital staff, he walked into the administration office the following morning looking barely human. Pale skin. Bloodshot eyes. Hands trembling so badly he could barely hold the resignation form. Several nurses later claimed he smelled faintly of smoke, even though there had been no fire anywhere in the building. He refused to explain what happened on the 3rd floor. Refused therapy. Refused to speak to police or hospital administrators. Whenever someone asked about room 317, Daniel's expression changed instantly. His entire body would go tense like he was hearing something nobody else could hear. One nurse recalled him whispering only a single sentence before leaving the hospital forever. They were waiting for someone to answer. After resigning, Daniel disappeared from Chicago entirely. His apartment sat abandoned for weeks before the landlord cleared it out. But according to one of his former co-workers, strange things started happening to Daniel after that night. He reportedly stopped sleeping normally. Neighbors claimed they heard him pacing his apartment hallways at impossible hours of the morning. Sometimes talking to someone in low whispers through the walls. One woman who lived across from him later told police she repeatedly heard a phone ringing inside his apartment every night around 3:11 a.m. Ringing. Then silence. Ringing again. Over and over until sunrise. The terrifying part was this: Daniel never owned a landline phone. 6 months later, during another violent thunderstorm, a new overnight security guard named Marcus Hill was assigned to monitor the East Wing cameras at St. Augustine Medical Center. Around 3 a.m., the hospital became unusually quiet again. No emergency calls. No movement in the corridors. Nothing except rain hammering against the windows and distant thunder shaking the building. Then the desk phone rang. One sharp ring that echoed through the empty security office. Marcus reportedly answered without thinking. Security. For several seconds, only static answered him. Thick crackling static mixed with something that sounded disturbingly like breathing. Wet breathing. Then a woman's voice whispered through the line. Weak. Broken. Burned. Please come upstairs. The line disconnected immediately afterward. Marcus looked down at the caller ID screen. 3rd floor, room 317. He later told hospital administrators he assumed it was a prank until he checked the security cameras. The third-floor corridor was empty. But according to his statement, just before the camera feed glitched into static, he saw something standing inside the doorway of room 317. A tall figure in a hospital gown, watching the camera. Marcus quit before sunrise. Hospital management attempted to dismiss the incident as stress-related confusion caused by overnight exhaustion. Officially, the hospital denied any malfunction involving room 317. But during an internal maintenance review conducted weeks later, technicians uncovered something deeply disturbing buried in the hospital's old electrical records. Room 317 no longer had an active phone connection. It hadn't had one since the fire nearly a year earlier. The entire phone line had melted during the blackout and was permanently disconnected afterward. There was no functioning cable, no signal access, no operational receiver inside the room. According to hospital records, it was physically impossible for calls to originate from room 317. Yet overnight staff continued reporting strange incidents connected to the third floor. Elevator buttons lighting up by themselves at exactly 3:11 a.m. Security cameras briefly showing patients standing in sealed hallways before the footage cut to static. Nurses hearing someone crying softly behind the walls near room 317 during storms. One janitor reportedly abandoned his cleaning cart and quit mid-shift after hearing a woman whisper directly behind him, "Don't leave me here." But the most disturbing incident happened nearly 2 years later. During renovations, maintenance workers were finally ordered to reopen room 317 permanently. 3 contractors entered the room shortly after midnight to remove damaged wall panels left untouched since the fire. At 3:11 a.m., security cameras outside the corridor failed simultaneously. Every monitor connected to the east wing cut to black for exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When the video feed returned, the hallway was empty. The contractors were gone. Their tools remained scattered across the floor inside room 317. One ladder still stood upright near the burned wall. A flashlight lay spinning slowly on the ground when security arrived. But the workers themselves were never found anywhere inside the hospital. No signs of forced exit. No evidence they ever left the building. Police eventually declared all 3 missing persons. The hospital quietly sealed the entire East Wing afterward. Even today, former employees of St. Augustine Medical Center refuse to discuss the third floor after dark. Some claim the hallway still appears on old security monitors despite being disconnected years ago. Others swear they've seen lights flickering inside room 317 late at night during thunderstorms. And according to multiple overnight staff members, the desk phone in the security office still rings occasionally at exactly 3:11 a.m. One sharp ring, then silence. And every time someone checks the caller ID screen, it always displays the same thing. Room 317. Story 2. The Last Train to Ashbrook. Maya Collins hated working alone at night, but there was something about Ashbrook Station that made the isolation feel genuinely wrong after midnight. The station sat buried deep within the forested mountains of rural Oregon, surrounded by endless miles of black pine trees and steep cliffs that swallowed radio signals whenever storms rolled through. During the daytime, Ashbrook looked harmless enough, just another forgotten railway stop slowly dying with time. Rusted tracks, weathered benches, faded warning signs creaking in cold mountain wind. But at night, the station transformed into something else entirely. Something abandoned. Something ancient. The kind of place that felt cut off from the rest of the world the moment darkness settled over the mountains. The nearest town sat nearly 2 hours away by road, and after midnight, even truckers avoided the route leading toward Ashbrook. They claimed the fog in those mountains behaved strangely. They claimed people disappeared out there. Maya used to laugh at those stories when she first accepted the overnight dispatch position. After 6 months alone at Ashbrook Station, she didn't laugh anymore. Her job itself was painfully simple. Monitor track activity. Approve late-night cargo trains passing through the mountains. Maintain communication with nearby stations. Stay awake until sunrise. That was it. The station consisted of one cramped dispatch office with old monitors and outdated radios. One empty waiting platform exposed to freezing mountain wind, one flickering vending machine that barely worked, and endless forest stretching in every direction beyond the tracks. Most nights passed in suffocating silence broken only by distant animal sounds echoing from the trees. Coyotes. Owls. Sometimes noises Maya couldn't identify at all. The isolation slowly got inside your head during those overnight shifts. By 2 a.m., even the station lights began feeling oppressive. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed constantly overhead like trapped insects while fog rolled silently across the tracks outside. And then there were the stories. Every old railroad worker around Ashbrook eventually mentioned Train 66. Always quietly. Always after making sure nobody else was listening. According to local railway records, Train 66 no longer officially existed. Years earlier, during one of the worst winter storms in Oregon history, the passenger train derailed somewhere deep within the mountains during a blizzard. Rescue teams reportedly found twisted train cars buried beneath snow and ice. Every passenger aboard died. Families. Conductors. Children traveling home for the holidays. No survivors. Afterward, the railway company permanently erased the route from operation. But older workers still whispered about the train late at night. They claimed Train 66 sometimes returned during heavy fog. Always arriving after midnight. Always silent. No engine noise. No passenger chatter. No lights except dim yellow glows inside the windows. Some claimed they saw figures standing motionless inside the carriages. Others swore the train appeared physically damaged, windows cracked, metal torn open, entire sections blackened with ice and rust. But every version of the story ended the same way. If you boarded Train 66, you never came back. Maya always dismissed the stories as typical railroad superstition. Every isolated workplace developed ghost stories eventually. Hospitals had haunted rooms. Highways had phantom hitchhikers. Railroad workers invented cursed trains. Simple as that. At least that's what she believed until October 17th. That night, thick fog covered the mountains so heavily Maya could barely see beyond the station platform lights. Cold rain tapped softly against the office windows while the surrounding forest vanished completely beneath shifting white mist. The isolation felt heavier than usual. Even the radio chatter from nearby stations had died hours earlier. By 1:40 a.m., Ashbrook Station sat in complete silence. Maya stared tiredly at the glowing monitors inside the dispatch office while sipping stale coffee and trying desperately to stay awake. Then the radio activated by itself. Static exploded through the speaker loud enough to make her jump violently in her chair. Sharp crackling interference filled the room for several seconds. Then a voice emerged. Distorted. Mechanical. Like multiple voices speaking together through deep water. Train 66 approaching platform. Maya froze instantly. Her pulse quickened hard enough to hurt. She stared slowly toward the radio speaker. Silence returned immediately afterward. Only static remained. She frowned and grabbed the microphone quickly. Dispatch to incoming train, identify yourself. No response. Just static. Maya's stomach tightened uneasily. Train 66 didn't exist. She immediately turned toward the railway system monitor mounted beside her desk. Incoming train schedules displayed clearly across the screen. Cargo routes. Maintenance tracks. Signal activity. But there was nothing approaching Ashbrook Station. No scheduled arrivals. No detected movement anywhere within 50 miles of the mountain line. The track sensors showed completely empty rails. Maya checked again more carefully. Nothing. Yet deep outside beyond the fog-covered platform, she suddenly heard it. A train horn. Low. Mournful. Echoing through the mountains like the cry of something enormous and dying. Maya slowly looked toward the office window. The sound came again. Closer this time. Metal grinding somewhere inside the fog. Wheels screeching faintly against tracks. But according to the monitor beside her, no train existed out there at all. The fluorescent lights inside the office flickered once overhead. Then the platform speaker outside crackled to life by itself. Static hissed loudly through the station before an automated voice whispered through the darkness. Now arriving. Train 66. Maya felt cold terror spread slowly through her chest. Because she had disconnected the platform announcement system 3 weeks earlier during maintenance repairs. It no longer worked. Outside the office windows, deep within the rolling fog beyond the station lights, something large was moving toward Ashbrook Station. No trains appeared anywhere on the dispatch monitors. No incoming signals. No flashing indicators. No active routes within miles of Ashbrook Station. The railway system showed empty tracks stretching endlessly through the mountains beneath the storm. Nothing was supposed to be out there. Then Maya heard it again. A train horn somewhere deep beyond the fog. Low. Hollow. Mournful enough to make the hairs rise instantly along her arms. The sound echoed through the mountains like the dying cry of something enormous lost in darkness. Maya slowly stood from her chair, eyes fixed toward the station windows. Impossible. The horn came again. Closer this time. And beneath it, another sound emerged from the fog-covered tracks outside. Metal grinding against metal. Wheels screeching softly. The heavy groan of old machinery forcing itself forward through rusted rails. Outside, thick white fog rolled slowly across the platform like smoke spilling over the ground. The station lights barely penetrated it. Maya stepped closer to the glass, her pulse quickening hard enough to hurt. Then she saw it. Something massive moving inside the fog. A shape darker than the mist surrounding it. Slowly, the front of a train emerged onto the tracks leading into Ashbrook Station. Maya's breath caught in her throat instantly. The locomotive looked ancient. Not old in the normal sense, ancient in a way that felt wrong. The steel body was blackened with rust and streaked with something darker running down the sides like old water damage or dried blood. Paint peeled away in long curling strips exposing corroded metal beneath. Frost clung unnaturally to parts of the engine despite the rain outside. Its headlights glowed weakly through the fog in a dim yellow color that barely illuminated the tracks ahead, making the train appear less like a machine and more like a corpse dragging itself forward through darkness. The windows were completely dark. No passengers visible. No interior lighting. No movement anywhere inside the carriages. And yet the train continued rolling silently toward the empty platform. Maya noticed something deeply unsettling immediately. There was almost no engine noise. No roaring diesel motor. No electrical hum. Only the screech of old wheels grinding slowly across rails. Like the train was being pulled forward by something other than machinery. Her stomach tightened painfully as the front engine finally passed beneath the station lights. The engine number came into view through layers of rust and peeling paint. 66. Maya felt cold terror crawl slowly through her body. No. No way. The train slowed with a long metallic groan that echoed through the station like something dying in pain. Steam hissed softly from beneath the wheels while the carriages creaked and settled into place beside the platform. Then everything stopped. Silence swallowed Ashbrook Station completely. The train sat motionless in the fog with its dim yellow headlights staring blankly into the darkness beyond the tracks. No doors opened. No conductor stepped out. No passengers moved behind the black windows. Nothing. The entire train looked abandoned. Dead. Maya stared at it through the office glass while her breathing grew shallow. The station suddenly felt freezing cold around her. Then the platform announcement speaker crackled loudly overhead. Static hissed through the empty station before the automated voice slowly emerged. Now arriving. Ashbrook. Maya immediately noticed something horrifying about the voice. It sounded wrong. Distorted. Like several different people speaking the same sentence together slightly out of sync. Male voices. Female voices. Elderly voices. Children. All layered together beneath heavy static. Ashbrook. The final word dragged unnaturally long before dissolving into crackling interference. Maya grabbed the station radio immediately, hands shaking slightly now. "This isn't funny," she snapped into the microphone. "Who's operating that train?" Silence answered her. Then a burst of static loud enough to hurt her ears. Maya looked back toward the platform. The train remained completely motionless. Rain tapped softly against the windows while fog drifted around the carriages in slow, unnatural patterns. Something about the train made the entire station feel wrong now. Smaller somehow. Claustrophobic. Like the forest surrounding Ashbrook had moved closer during the train's arrival. Then, with a slow metallic hiss, one of the train doors slid open by itself. Maya froze. The opening revealed only darkness inside the carriage. No lights. No passengers visible. Just a black doorway leading into silence. Cold fog spilled slowly out from inside the train and spread across the platform floor. Maya stared at the darkness inside the carriage for several long seconds. And then she realized something that made her chest tighten with terror. She could hear breathing coming from inside the train. Not one person breathing. Many. Slow. Wet. uneven breaths echoing softly together from somewhere deep within the darkness beyond the open door. Maya should have stayed inside the dispatch office. Every instinct in her body was already warning her that something about the train was deeply wrong. But isolation does strange things to people during overnight shifts. Silence makes curiosity dangerous after midnight. Especially when you've spent months hearing stories you never truly believed until that exact moment. Before she could stop herself, Maya grabbed her flashlight and stepped out onto the platform. The cold hit her immediately. Not normal mountain cold. This felt unnatural. Sharp and damp enough to sting inside her lungs with every breath. Fog rolled slowly across the tracks around her ankles while freezing rain drifted softly through the station lights. Maya instantly noticed the smell. Wet. Rotten. Like stagnant underground water trapped for decades beneath earth and stone. Mixed beneath it was another scent she couldn't immediately identify, something metallic and faintly sweet, like rust soaked in old blood. The train sat completely motionless beside the platform. And the silence surrounding it felt unbearable now that she stood close to it. There was no engine noise. No electrical humming. No clicking machinery. Nothing. A rail train should have been vibrating with mechanical life. This one felt dead. The dim yellow headlights cast weak beams into the fog while water dripped slowly from the rusted metal exterior. Maya approached cautiously, boots echoing softly against the wet platform. As she neared the open carriage door, she noticed frost clinging to the steel steps despite the rain. Thick white frost. Her breath fogged visibly in front of her face now. Inside the nearest carriage, weak overhead lights flickered faintly. The interior looked impossibly old. Cracked leather seats. Tarnished brass railings. Peeling wallpaper stained dark by age and moisture. Rows of empty seats stretched into darkness deeper inside the train where the flickering lights could no longer reach. Maya slowly raised her flashlight toward the back of the carriage. And froze. Someone was sitting near the rear window. A woman. Motionless. Wearing outdated clothing straight out of the 1950s, a pale blue coat. White gloves, small hat tilted neatly atop dark curled hair. She sat perfectly still with her back facing Maya while rainwater dripped slowly from the brim of her hat onto the train floor. Maya swallowed hard. Hello. Her voice sounded small inside the silent carriage. The woman didn't move. Didn't react at all. Maya exchanged a nervous glance back toward the station platform behind her. Everything outside looked distant now beneath the rolling fog. Somehow darker than before. Then curiosity pushed her one step too far. Maya climbed aboard the train. The second her feet touched the carriage floor, the train doors slammed shut behind her with explosive force. Maya screamed and spun around instantly. At that exact moment, every light inside the carriage died. Total darkness swallowed the train. Then the entire carriage lurched violently forward. Maya lost her balance and crashed hard against a row of seats as the train suddenly accelerated with terrifying force. Metal screamed beneath the floor. The walls shook violently around her while unseen wheels roared against tracks somewhere below. Maya scrambled toward the doors blindly in the darkness, panic exploding through her chest. Hey! She pounded both fists against the metal doors repeatedly. Open the doors. No response. Only darkness and the deafening sound of the train gaining speed unnaturally fast. Maya looked desperately toward the windows, expecting to see the fog-covered mountains outside racing past. But her blood ran cold instantly. There was nothing outside the train anymore. No forest. No station lights. No mountains. No tracks. Only blackness. Endless blackness stretching infinitely beyond the windows, like the train was moving through a void where the world itself no longer existed. Maya stumbled backward in horror. Then the lights flickered back on. Dim yellow bulbs buzzed weakly overhead once again. Maya froze completely. The carriage was no longer empty. Every seat was occupied now. Passengers sat silently throughout the train from front to back. Dozens of them. Pale, motionless figures illuminated beneath the weak flickering lights. None of them had been their seconds earlier. Maya's breathing became shallow immediately. Slowly, she realized something even worse. The passengers looked wrong. Their skin was unnaturally pale with gray-blue undertones, like corpses left too long beneath winter water. Some wore clothing from different decades, old military uniforms, outdated dresses, children's coats, conductor hats covered in frost. Water dripped steadily from many of them onto the train floor despite the complete stillness inside the carriage. One old man sat with half his face crushed inward as though shattered against glass. A young woman farther down the aisle clutched a suitcase to her chest while thick blood ran slowly from her ears. Several passengers had frostbite-blackened fingers curled tightly around seat armrests. And every single one of them sat perfectly motionless in absolute silence. Their eyes stared forward blankly without blinking. Maya felt terror spread through her so intensely it became difficult to breathe. The woman in the blue coat near the back slowly tilted her head sideways. Bones cracked softly inside her neck. Then, one by one, every passenger aboard the train turned toward Maya at the exact same time. Water dripped steadily from the passengers' clothes onto the carriage floor. Tap. 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 The sound echoed unnaturally loud through the silent train like rainwater leaking into a coffin. Small puddles formed beneath their shoes, spreading slowly along the rusted floor panels while the dim overhead lights flickered weakly above them. Maya backed away instinctively, her pulse hammering violently in her ears. Every survival instinct inside her screamed that something was horribly wrong. Nobody blinked. Nobody breathed. The passengers simply stared forward motionlessly beneath the yellow lights while water streamed from their coats and hair. Then, all at once, every single head inside the carriage turned toward Maya simultaneously. The movement was sudden and mechanical. Bones cracked softly inside necks twisting too far sideways. Maya felt cold terror seize her chest so hard it became painful to inhale. A little girl sitting near the aisle slowly smiled at her. Frost covered the child's eyelashes and strands of pale blonde hair. Her lips were dark blue with frostbite, cracked deeply enough to reveal blood beneath the skin. She clutched a soaked stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest while melted snow dripped from her sleeves. "Are you staying?" the girl asked softly. Her voice sounded small. Innocent. But underneath it Maya heard another sound layered beneath the child's words, distant screaming buried beneath static and wind. Maya immediately spun toward the train doors and grabbed the handle with both hands. Locked. She pulled harder desperately. Nothing moved. The metal felt freezing cold beneath her skin. Behind her, movement finally began inside the carriage. The passengers slowly stood from their seats one by one. Bones cracked loudly throughout the train as stiff limbs straightened. Water poured from their clothing in streams now, splashing heavily onto the floor. Some passengers moved unnaturally jerky like broken mannequins forcing themselves upright after years underwater. Others rose too smoothly, their movements disturbingly calm. Maya backed farther away down the aisle while trying not to look directly at their faces. But then the old woman near the back finally turned fully toward her. Maya nearly screamed. Half the woman's face had been crushed inward as though slammed violently against shattered glass. Jagged shards remained embedded deep in her skin and scalp. One eye socket was completely empty, exposing darkness inside her skull. The remaining eye stared directly at Maya without blinking while blood mixed with melted snow dripped from her chin. When she spoke, her voice rattled wetly inside her ruined throat. "We missed our stop." Then every passenger aboard the train began walking toward Maya. Not fast. Not aggressively. Slowly. Calmly. Like people approaching someone they already knew could never escape. Their wet footsteps echoed softly through the carriage while pale dead faces stared at her with quiet anticipation. Maya turned and ran. She shoved open the door into the next carriage and stumbled inside breathlessly. The second she entered, her heart nearly stopped again. Every seat in this carriage was occupied too. More passengers. More dead faces staring silently beneath flickering lights. A burned man in a business suit sat near the front with melted skin hanging from his hands. A woman farther back clutched a baby wrapped in frost-covered blankets. Several passengers appeared mangled beyond recognition, limbs bent wrong, skulls cracked open, jaws hanging unnaturally loose. And as Maya passed through the carriage, every single one slowly began standing up. Maya screamed and ran faster into the next carriage. Then the next. Then the next. But every carriage looked identical. Endless rows of dead passengers sitting beneath dim yellow lights. Silent staring faces following her as she ran. Some appeared frozen solid with ice crystals growing across their skin. Others looked burned black as charcoal. One entire carriage seemed filled with passengers whose bodies had been torn apart during impact, twisted limbs, exposed bone, blood-soaked clothing frozen stiff with age. And every time Maya entered another carriage, the passengers slowly stood together and turned toward her. The train accelerated harder beneath her feet now. The walls rattled violently while distant metallic screams echoed through the endless carriages behind her. Maya glanced outside the windows while running, and immediately wished she hadn't. The blackness surrounding the train wasn't empty anymore. Shapes moved beside the train in the darkness. Tall figures. Thin, impossibly elongated silhouettes running silently alongside the speeding train while keeping perfect pace with it. Maya could never fully focus on them because they moved strangely, almost flickering in and out of existence beside the windows. But she saw enough. Limbs too long. Heads bent unnaturally sideways. Pale faces without features. And all of them watching the train as it moved through endless darkness. Maya kept running through carriage after carriage until another horrifying realization finally settled into her mind. There was no end to the train. It just kept going. Endless compartments stretching forever into darkness. Infinite rows of seats. Infinite dead passengers. The train no longer felt connected to reality at all. It felt like a place trapped outside the world itself. Like something that had been traveling through darkness for decades without destination or escape. Maya slowed briefly, gasping for breath while staring ahead into another identical carriage. Then a voice suddenly spoke directly beside her. Ticket. Maya screamed and stumbled backward violently. A conductor stood inches away from her. Tall. Thin. Wearing an old railroad uniform soaked completely black as though drenched in freezing water. His cap shadowed most of his face, but Maya could still see pale skin stretched tightly over something too thin beneath. His eyes remained hidden inside darkness. Ticket, he repeated calmly. Maya backed away, trembling uncontrollably. I don't belong here. The conductor tilted his head slowly. The movement made soft cracking sounds inside his neck. Everyone belongs somewhere. He extended one pale hand toward her. Resting in his palm was a rusted train ticket stained dark around the edges. Maya stared at the printed words across it. One way. The overhead lights instantly shifted from yellow to deep crimson red. Blood-colored light flooded the endless carriage. Then distant screaming erupted somewhere far behind them. Not screams of pain. Excitement. Anticipation. Hundreds of voices shrieking together in celebration somewhere deeper inside the train. The conductor smiled slightly beneath the shadows hiding his face. Maya noticed his teeth looked black. We're almost there. Trembling violently, Maya slowly turned toward the nearest window. Far ahead in the endless darkness beyond the train tracks, lights had appeared. Dim at first, then growing brighter rapidly. An enormous station emerging from the void ahead. And waiting beneath those distant lights, thousands of motionless figures stood crowded along the platform, watching the train arrive. Far ahead in the darkness, the station grew larger with terrifying speed. At first it looked like nothing more than distant lights floating inside the void. But as the train thundered closer, Maya realized the structure was enormous. Vast platforms stretched endlessly beneath towering iron arches disappearing into blackness above. Ancient station lights flickered weakly through heavy fog, casting pale yellow illumination across cracked concrete and rusted tracks. And the platforms were crowded. Thousands of silhouettes stood motionless beneath the dead lights. Men. Women. Children. Endless rows of human shapes packed shoulder to shoulder as far as Maya could see. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They simply waited in total silence while Train 66 approached through the darkness. Maya felt primal terror flood every nerve in her body. The train began slowing with a deafening metallic scream. Wheels shrieked violently against tracks while the endless carriages rattled around her. The conductor beside her remained perfectly calm beneath the red emergency lighting. Then he leaned slightly closer and whispered in a low voice that sounded disturbingly human for the first time. Once the doors open. He paused. Maya could hear distant screaming echoing through the train behind them now. Do not let them pull you out. Before Maya could respond, something grabbed her ankle. Ice-cold fingers burst upward from beneath the seats surrounding her. Maya screamed as pale hands clawed desperately around her legs. More hands erupted from beneath the carriage floorboards. Rotting fingers. Burned fingers. Frozen blue hands slick with black water. They clutched at her clothing and skin with desperate strength while voices whispered from below the seats. Stay. Don't leave. Please. It's lonely. The dead passengers surrounding Maya moved closer now. Their pale faces twitched unnaturally beneath the crimson lights. Some were crying black tears. Others smiled with cracked, frostbitten lips. A burned child wrapped skeletal fingers around Maya's wrist while whispering through melted teeth. "We've been here so long." The train screeched violently as it entered the station. Maya looked out the window. The waiting figures outside were clearer now. Thousands upon thousands of shadowy people stood packed along the platforms beneath flickering dead lights. Their faces remained hidden beneath darkness, but Maya could feel all of them watching the train hungrily, waiting for the doors to open. Then the train stopped. Silence fell instantly. A horrible heavy silence that seemed to consume everything. The carriage doors slid open slowly with a long metallic hiss. Cold black fog poured into the train. Outside, the endless crowd remained completely motionless for several seconds. Then every single figure on the platform turned toward Maya at once. And smiled. Maya felt her blood turn to ice. Their smiles stretched too wide. Far too wide. Human mouths opening unnaturally across shadow-covered faces while rows of pale teeth emerged from darkness. Some of the figures had no eyes. Others had faces split open or hollowed entirely black inside. A few appeared twisted and broken like bodies destroyed in terrible accidents. But all of them were smiling directly at her. Then the screaming began. A deafening shriek erupted throughout the train as the dead passengers suddenly lunged toward Maya all at once. The conductor vanished instantly into darkness. Rotting hands grabbed at Maya's arms, legs, and hair while screaming voices filled the carriage from every direction. The little frostbitten girl clawed desperately at Maya's coat while crying, "Don't go." The burned passengers shoved forward violently. Dead faces pressed inches from hers. Open mouths. Broken teeth. Empty eye sockets leaking black water. Maya tore free in pure blind panic and threw herself toward the opposite side of the carriage just as icy fingers raked across her back hard enough to tear fabric. She slammed through the far exit door blindly, and suddenly everything vanished. Maya crashed violently onto wet gravel. Real gravel. Sharp stones tore into her palms and knees as freezing rain poured down around her. She gasped desperately for breath while lying beside the tracks in darkness. For several long seconds, she couldn't process what had happened. Then she slowly looked up. Ashbrook Station stood nearby beneath pale dawn light. Empty. Silent. The fog was gone. The tracks stretched motionless through the mountains exactly as they always had. No train. No screaming passengers. No impossible station in the darkness. Nothing. Maya staggered shakily to her feet while rain soaked through her clothes. The station platform sat completely deserted beneath weak morning light. Even the air felt normal again. Cold mountain air. Pine trees. Rain. Reality. Then her dispatch radio crackled weakly at her hip, nearly making her scream. "Maya. Respond." The voice sounded distant through static. "Maya, where the hell are you?" Her shaking hands grabbed the radio slowly. But before answering, Maya noticed the station clock mounted above the platform. 6:58 a.m. Sunrise. Maya stared at the clock in disbelief while cold rain ran down her face. Nearly her entire shift was gone. Hours had vanished. Yet inside the train, it had felt like only minutes. Somewhere far out in the mountains beyond Ashbrook Station, a train horn echoed faintly through the fog one final time. Low. Mournful. And impossibly far away. Maya Collins resigned from Ashbrook Station exactly 2 weeks later. According to the Railway Administration Office, she never gave a full explanation for leaving. She simply walked into the regional headquarters looking exhausted, pale, and visibly shaken, handed over her station keys, and refused to work another overnight shift ever again. Co-workers later said she looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles hollowed beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled constantly, especially whenever someone mentioned trains or mountain routes. One dispatcher claimed Maya repeatedly glanced toward empty hallways during conversations as though expecting to see someone standing there watching her. Another employee later recalled overhearing Maya whisper something deeply unsettling under her breath while signing resignation paperwork. "It wasn't taking people somewhere," she murmured quietly. "It was collecting them." After leaving Ashbrook, Maya reportedly moved twice within 6 months. According to neighbors from her second apartment in Portland, strange things began happening around her almost immediately. Several residents complained about hearing train sounds late at night despite living nowhere near active rail lines. One elderly tenant swore she repeatedly woke around 1:43 a.m. to hear distant metal screeching and a low train horn echoing outside her building during heavy rain. Another neighbor claimed Maya often stood frozen at her apartment window in the middle of the night staring into the fog outside as though waiting for something to appear. But the most disturbing incident happened nearly a year later. During a severe winter storm, police responded to reports of a woman wandering alone near abandoned rail tracks outside Portland shortly after midnight. Officers later identified the woman as Maya Collins. According to the report, she appeared disoriented and terrified, repeatedly insisting she could hear a train approaching through the fog even though the tracks had been inactive for years. One officer later privately admitted that during the encounter, he also heard something strange. A train horn. Low. Distant. Echoing through the storm despite there being no operational railways anywhere nearby. Maya was eventually taken home safely. But after that night, she reportedly stopped discussing Ashbrook Station entirely. Yet the stories surrounding Train 66 never disappeared. Railroad workers across rural Oregon still refuse certain mountain routes during heavy fog. Older conductors still exchange nervous glances whenever someone mentions Ashbrook after midnight. Truck drivers passing through the mountains occasionally report seeing dim yellow lights moving silently between trees where no active tracks exist anymore. Some claim they've seen the outline of old passenger carriages sliding through the fog beside abandoned rail lines. Others report hearing metal grinding somewhere deep in the forest long after the last scheduled trains have stopped running. But the most terrifying reports always come from former railway workers assigned near Ashbrook Station. Over the years, several overnight dispatchers have described hearing strange radio transmissions during storms. Static-filled voices announcing arrivals for trains that officially do not exist. Some workers claim station speakers activate by themselves around 1:43 a.m. despite disconnected power systems. Others report seeing shadowy figures standing motionless at the empty platform before vanishing into fog moments later. One maintenance crew inspecting the abandoned station years after closure allegedly discovered something deeply disturbing hidden inside the old dispatch office. A stack of passenger tickets scattered across the floor beneath layers of dust and water damage. Rusted paper tickets. Every single one stamped with the same destination. One way. The railway company permanently shut down Ashbrook Station not long afterward. Officially due to budget cuts and hazardous weather conditions. Unofficially, workers simply refused to continue overnight assignments there. Eventually the tracks through the mountains were abandoned entirely. Nature slowly reclaimed the station. Trees grew between rusted rails. Fog swallowed the broken platforms. Wind moved endlessly through empty waiting areas where passengers no longer came. Today, Ashbrook Station still sits forgotten deep in the Oregon mountains, rotting beneath rain and pine forest shadows. And yet, during heavy fog, locals still report hearing a train approaching through the darkness. Not a modern train. Something older. Slower. The sound of rusted wheels grinding against dead tracks. Witnesses describe dim yellow headlights appearing briefly between the trees before vanishing into mist. Some even claim they've seen silhouettes standing inside dark train windows as it passes silently through the mountains. Watching. Waiting. The truly horrifying part is this: according to official railway records, no trains have operated anywhere near Ashbrook Station for nearly 15 years. The tracks themselves were partially removed long ago. Entire sections no longer physically connect to any functioning railway system. Which means that if something is still arriving at Ashbrook during fog-covered nights, it isn't coming from anywhere in the real world. And sometimes, when storms roll through the mountains after midnight, residents living miles away claim they still hear the station speakers crackling softly through the fog. Now arriving. Train 66. Followed by the sound of doors slowly opening somewhere in the darkness. Story 3. The call center floor. In the center of downtown Atlanta stood a massive corporate office building called Mercer Communications. During the daytime, the building looked completely ordinary: polished glass walls reflecting sunlight across crowded streets, busy elevators packed with employees, lobby televisions humming with financial news, coffee cups everywhere, people rushing between meetings beneath bright fluorescent lights. Just another corporate skyscraper towering over the city. But after midnight, the building changed. The higher floors emptied first. Then the elevators quieted. Then the office lights slowly died one by one until most of the tower stood dark against the Atlanta skyline. Except for the 7th floor. The 7th floor never truly slept. That floor handled overnight emergency customer support for multiple national contracts, utility companies, medical response systems, security monitoring services. The kind of calls people only made when something had already gone wrong. Minimal staff worked overnight there. Just enough employees to keep lines active until sunrise. Dim lighting glowed weakly between endless rows of cubicles while computer monitors flickered against tired faces at 3 a.m. The air always smelled faintly of burnt coffee, overheated electronics, and exhaustion. Employees jokingly called it the graveyard shift. But nobody ever joked about Desk 42. New hires learned quickly not to ask too many questions about it. The cubicle itself sat near the far end of the floor beside a darkened corner where overhead lights constantly flickered no matter how many times maintenance replaced them. No one used the desk anymore. No computer login. No employee assignment. No decorations. Just an empty headset hanging over a silent monitor that remained unplugged year-round. Yet despite that, overnight employees avoided even walking near Desk 42 after 3 a.m. Because according to office rumors, every employee ever permanently assigned there either quit suddenly or disappeared entirely. Management always dismissed the stories as stress-related gossip. But older workers lowered their voices whenever they mentioned one particular name. Lauren Mitchell. Nina Patel first heard the rumors during training week after accepting the overnight position out of desperation. Rent had increased again. Student debt kept piling up. And Mercer Communications paid surprisingly well for overnight shifts nobody else wanted. The work itself seemed simple enough. Answer incoming calls. Read approved scripts. Escalate emergencies. Resolve complaints. Stay awake until sunrise. Ignore the crushing exhaustion that slowly blurred reality around 4 in the morning. Nina adapted quickly during her first week. Strange customers didn't bother her anymore. People screaming over internet outages. Elderly callers rambling incoherently at 2 a.m. Frightened voices reporting power failures during storms. Overnight call center work felt oddly detached from the real world, like existing in limbo while everyone else slept. But on her very first night, Nina's manager had pulled her aside before leaving the floor. His expression suddenly became serious in a way she hadn't seen before. "One thing," he said quietly. "If the internal line from desk 42 rings." He hesitated. Don't answer it." Nina laughed immediately, assuming it was another stupid office prank. "Why?" The manager avoided eye contact. "Just don't." Then he walked away before she could ask anything else. Nina forgot about the warning for almost a week. Nothing unusual happened. Long nights blurred together beneath fluorescent lights and glowing monitors. The 7th floor remained quiet except for keyboard clicks, ringing customer lines, and exhausted employees sipping cold coffee while pretending not to fall asleep. But on Friday night, everything changed. At exactly 3:33 a.m., desk 42 rang. One sharp electronic tone cut through the office loud enough to silence the entire floor instantly. Every employee froze. Nina looked up from her monitor immediately. The ringing came from the far corner of the office where desk 42 sat abandoned beneath flickering lights. Ring. 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 Nina felt unease spread slowly through her chest. Something about the sound felt wrong. Too loud. Too sharp. Like the phone wasn't ringing through speakers but directly inside the room itself. Then she noticed something terrifying. Nobody sat at desk 42. Nobody had for years. Yet the internal line continued ringing steadily through the silent office. Ring. 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 No one moved. No one spoke. Employees stared fixedly at their screens pretending not to hear it while the phone echoed endlessly through the dim cubicles. Nina slowly looked around the office in confusion. Why isn't anyone answering it? She whispered. A coworker sitting nearby muttered quietly without looking up. Because Lauren did. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating silence. The phone abruptly stopped ringing. And at that exact moment, every computer monitor on the 7th floor flickered simultaneously. The lights overhead buzzed violently. Static flashed across dozens of screens throughout the office. Employees stiffened immediately. Some cursed softly under their breath. Others lowered their heads without speaking. Then a message slowly appeared across every monitor in the building. Can you hear me? The words glowed white against black screens all around the office. Nina's pulse quickened instantly. The message remained there for several long seconds while fluorescent lights flickered overhead in uneven bursts. Then another line slowly typed itself beneath the first. Please answer. Somewhere deep in the office, Nina heard a woman crying softly. Nina's heartbeat quickened immediately as she stared at the glowing message on her monitor. "Can you hear me?" The word sat motionless against the black screen for several long seconds while the office remained completely silent around her. Then, without warning, every monitor flickered once and the message vanished instantly. The normal customer support software returned as though nothing had happened. Nobody spoke. Nobody reacted. Employees simply lowered their heads and continued typing like they hadn't just witnessed the same impossible thing together. The silence afterward felt wrong. Forced. Like everyone on the 7th floor had silently agreed never to acknowledge whatever had just appeared on their screens. Nina glanced nervously toward desk 42. The cubicle sat dark and empty beneath flickering fluorescent lights. The abandoned headset still hung motionless over the desk divider. She swallowed hard and tried convincing herself it had been some kind of system malfunction. A prank. Corrupted software. Anything logical. But deep down, unease had already settled into her stomach like ice water. Hours crawled by painfully slowly after that. Calls continued. Complaints. Emergency transfers. Scripts repeated endlessly through headsets while the clock dragged toward 4 a.m. Yet the atmosphere on the 7th floor had changed completely. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody wandered away from their cubicles unnecessarily. Even the supervisor spoke quietly now, constantly glancing toward the far corner where desk 42 sat in darkness. Around 4:17 a.m., Nina finally stood to use the restroom. The office felt colder than before as she walked past rows of glowing monitors and exhausted employees. Somewhere beyond the cubicles, she could hear rain tapping softly against the building windows high above downtown Atlanta. The restroom itself was empty and silent except for buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. Nina splashed cold water against her face while staring at her reflection. She looked exhausted already. Pale. Uneasy. She told herself again that she was overreacting. But as she walked back toward the office floor moments later, something immediately made her stop cold in the hallway. Desk 42's computer monitor was on. Nina stared at it from several feet away. That wasn't possible. The entire workstation had been disconnected for years according to everyone on the floor. Yet now pale blue light glowed softly from the abandoned cubicle. The screen displayed an active internal call connection. Call duration, 3 minutes and 11 seconds. Someone was connected to the line. Nina slowly approached the cubicle while her pulse hammered inside her chest. The headset hanging over the desk suddenly crackled softly. Then a voice emerged faintly through the speakers. Please. Nina froze. The voice sounded weak. Female. Trembling with fear. She looked around quickly toward the rest of the office. Nobody seemed to notice. Employees continued working silently beneath dim lights while the abandoned desk whispered in the corner. Against every instinct screaming at her not to, Nina slowly lifted the headset. Hello. Static hissed loudly through the earpiece. Then she heard crying. A woman sobbing uncontrollably somewhere on the other end of the line. Wet choking breaths mixed with muffled panic. Nina frowned uneasily. Who is this? The crying stopped instantly. Complete silence filled the headset for several long seconds. Then the woman whispered softly enough that Nina almost didn't hear it. Look under the desk. Nina stared at the empty cubicle. What? No response. Only static breathing softly through the headset. Slowly, Nina lowered herself toward the floor. Her pulse pounded harder with every movement. The space beneath desk 42 was dark except for faint blue monitor light illuminating scattered dust and old cable wiring. Then Nina saw the words carved directly into the underside of the wooden desk surface. "Help me, I'm still here." The letters were deep, jagged, carved violently enough to splinter the wood around them. Nina stumbled backward immediately, nearly falling onto the carpet. Her breathing turned sharp and uneven. Then the office lights flickered violently overhead. Every fluorescent bulb on the 7th floor buzzed loud enough to hurt. And suddenly every phone in the office began ringing at once. Hundreds of ringing tones exploded throughout the floor simultaneously. Employees shouted in panic. Supervisors jumped from their desks yelling over the noise. Computer screens flashed wildly between incoming calls while red notification lights blinked across every cubicle. The ringing became deafening within seconds. But beneath all the chaos, Nina heard something else. Breathing. Right behind her. Slow. Wet. Human breathing directly beside her shoulder. Nina turned slowly toward desk 42. A woman stood there, motionless beside the cubicle. Corporate office clothes clung wetly to her body as water dripped steadily from her fingertips onto the carpet below. Long dark hair hung over her face in soaked strands while her head tilted downward unnaturally. Nina stepped backward instinctively, heart slamming violently against her ribs. Are you okay?" The woman slowly raised her head. Nina immediately wished she hadn't asked. Her eyes were gone. Only empty black sockets remained where they should have been. Thick dark liquid streamed slowly down her pale cheeks. Her skin looked swollen and gray like something left underwater too long. Her mouth trembled unnaturally before opening slightly. "They never found my body." The lights died instantly. Total darkness swallowed the 7th floor. Employees screamed somewhere across the office. Phones continued ringing endlessly through the blackness while desks slammed over and footsteps pounded wildly between cubicles. Something moved quickly nearby. Too quickly. Wet footsteps circled through the darkness between rows of desks. Nina dropped immediately to the floor and crawled beneath the nearest cubicle, trembling violently. Her breath shook uncontrollably while the carpet beneath her hands felt damp and freezing cold. Nearby, slow wet footsteps passed beside her hiding place. Drip. Step. Drip. Step. Like someone soaked completely through walking barefoot across the office floor. Then the woman's voice whispered softly through the darkness only inches away. "You answer strangers every night. You answer strangers every night." The whisper drifted through the darkness directly beside Nina's ear. So close she could feel cold breath moving strands of her hair. Nina pressed herself deeper beneath the desk, trembling violently while the 7th floor remained drowned in total blackness. Somewhere nearby, employees were still screaming and running between cubicles, but the sounds felt distant now. Muffled. Like the office itself was sinking underwater. Wet footsteps moved slowly around Nina's hiding place. Closer. Drip. Step. Drip. Step. Then the woman whispered again. But nobody answered me. The voice sounded broken now. Not angry. Hurt. Deeply hurt in a way that made Nina's stomach twist with dread. The footsteps stopped directly beside her desk. Nina held her breath. Then the voice came one final time. Softer than before. Trembling with grief and rage tangled together. Not when I screamed. Something brushed slowly through Nina's hair. Ice-cold fingers trailing lightly across her scalp. Nina nearly cried out, clamping both hands over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. Her entire body locked in terror while freezing cold spread across the back of her neck. Then suddenly every phone on the 7th floor stopped ringing at once. Silence slammed into the office so abruptly it felt violent. No footsteps. No screaming employees. No buzzing fluorescent lights. Nothing. Complete dead silence filled the darkness around her. For several long seconds, Nina heard only the sound of her own panicked breathing beneath the desk. Then, one by one, computer monitors throughout the office activated together. Pale blue light flickered across the darkened cubicles. Nina slowly lowered her shaking hands from her mouth and looked outward from beneath the desk. Every monitor on the 7th floor displayed the same thing. Security camera footage. The office floor. The exact same 7th floor from years earlier. The timestamp in the corner showed a date from nearly 6 years ago. Nina slowly crawled out from beneath the desk while staring at the screens in horror. In the footage, employees still occupied the office. Phones rang normally. People worked quietly beneath bright fluorescent lights. And seated alone near the far end of the floor at desk 42 was a young woman wearing a company headset. Lauren. Nina immediately recognized her from the old employee ID photo supervisors occasionally referenced in whispers. Lauren Mitchell. The missing employee nobody openly discussed anymore. In the footage, Lauren worked quietly for several moments while typing into her computer. Then her desk phone rang. Nina felt her chest tighten painfully. Lauren answered the call. Instantly, the young woman froze. Even through the grainy security footage, Nina could see the fear slowly spreading across Lauren's face while she listened to whatever voice spoke through the headset. Then Lauren slowly looked downward beneath her desk. And screamed. The sound blasted suddenly through every speaker on the 7th floor loud enough to make Nina stumble backward. Lauren's terrified screams echoed throughout the office while employees in the footage jumped up from their desks in panic. The video glitched violently. Static flooded every monitor. Then the image stabilized again. Nina felt her stomach drop in horror. Lauren was being dragged downward beneath desk 42. Not pulled away by a person. Pulled downward into the floor itself. Her fingers clawed desperately against the carpet while screaming employees ran toward her in the footage. But the office floor beneath desk 42 looked wrong. Black. Liquid. Like the carpet had opened into some impossible hole beneath the cubicle. Lauren's body disappeared slowly into the darkness while her screams became distorted beneath layers of static. Her fingernails tore bloody streaks across the carpet as she fought to hold on. Then she vanished completely beneath the floor. The carpet sealed shut instantly afterward. Like nothing had happened. The footage ended abruptly. Static consumed every monitor again. Nina stood frozen in absolute horror while cold sweat ran down her face. Then she noticed something far worse. The timestamp on the security footage. It no longer showed a date from 6 years ago. The corner of every screen now displayed one word blinking softly beside the timestamp. Live. Nina's breath caught painfully in her throat. No. That wasn't possible. The office lights suddenly flickered back on overhead. Bright fluorescent light flooded the 7th floor instantly. Nina spun around in confusion. The office was empty. Completely empty. Every cubicle sat abandoned beneath the buzzing lights. Headsets rested silently on desks. Computer monitors glowed untouched. Coffee cups sat half full beside keyboards as though employees had vanished in the middle of work. There were no supervisors. No coworkers. No footsteps. No voices. The entire 7th floor looked deserted. Except for Nina. And desk 42. The abandoned cubicle sat quietly at the far end of the office beneath flickering overhead lights. Then the phone rang again. One sharp electronic tone echoed through the empty floor. Nina stared at the cubicle for several long seconds while terror battled against something else inside her. Pity. Desperation. Maybe even guilt. Slowly, she walked toward desk 42. The phone continued ringing steadily through the empty office. Ring. 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 Nina reached the desk and picked up the headset with trembling hands. How do I help you? Silence answered first. Thick static hissed softly through the line. Then Lauren whispered into Nina's ear. You can't. The second Lauren whispered, you can't. Something grabbed Nina's wrist from beneath the desk. Nina screamed instantly. Rotting fingers wrapped around her arm with terrifying strength, their skin cold and soft like waterlogged flesh left too long underground. The grip tightened painfully while the smell of mold, stagnant water, and decay exploded upward from beneath desk 42. Nina looked down in horror. A pale arm was emerging directly through the carpet below the cubicle. Not from a hole. Through the floor itself. The flesh looked swollen and gray with patches of skin peeling away from exposed bone. Then another hand emerged beside it. Then another. Dozens of them. Rotting hands clawed upward through the office carpet like drowning bodies fighting toward the surface. Burned fingers. Broken fingers. Hands with missing nails and blackened skin. They grabbed wildly at Nina's legs, clothes, and ankles while desperate whispering erupted from beneath the floorboards. Help us. Don't leave. Please. It hurts. Nina tore herself backward violently, ripping free from the dead grip around her wrist hard enough to tear skin. She stumbled across the office floor screaming while the carpet beneath desk 42 began bulging unnaturally. Like something enormous was moving underneath it. More hands erupted through cubicles nearby now. Employee chairs overturned violently while computer monitors flickered with static. Nina turned and ran toward the elevators at the far end of the 7th floor. Her footsteps pounded desperately against the carpet while overhead fluorescent lights blinked violently above her. The office no longer looked normal. The hallway leading toward the elevators stretched impossibly long now. Far longer than the 7th floor should physically allow. Cubicles blurred endlessly beside her while the elevator doors remained distant no matter how fast she ran. The lights overhead flashed in uneven bursts. Bright. Dark. Bright. Dark. And every time darkness swallowed the hallway for a split second, Nina saw movement beside the cubicles. Pale figures standing silently between desks. Watching her run. Then she heard it behind her. Something crawling rapidly across the carpet. Fast. Horribly fast. Not footsteps. Crawling. wet limbs slamming against the office floor with inhuman speed. Nina glanced back over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. Lauren was chasing her on all fours through the hallway. Her body moved impossibly wrong, joints bending backward while soaked hair dragged across the carpet behind her. Her jaw hung unnaturally wide open like it had been dislocated. Black liquid poured continuously from her empty eye sockets while her fingers clawed violently across the floor hard enough to leave deep tears in the carpet. And despite the horrifying speed she moved with, Lauren was smiling. A massive twisted grin stretched across her pale face while she crawled toward Nina faster than any human possibly could. Nina screamed and ran harder. The elevator doors finally slid open with a soft mechanical ding. She threw herself inside so hard she slammed against the back wall. Her trembling hands smashed the closed door button repeatedly while sobbing for breath. "Come on. Come on." Lauren reached the elevator hallway just as the doors began sliding shut. Nina saw her sprinting toward the opening on all fours with terrifying speed. Her head twisted sideways violently while black liquid splattered across the carpet beneath her hands. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of broken blackened teeth inside a throat that looked completely hollow. The elevator doors closed only inches before impact. Something slammed violently against the outside metal hard enough to shake the entire elevator car. Nina collapsed to the floor sobbing uncontrollably while the elevator descended. Above her, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly several times. For one horrifying moment, Nina thought she heard scratching across the roof of the elevator. Nails dragging slowly across metal. Then silence. The elevator reached the lobby moments later with a soft ding. The doors opened. Everything was normal again. Bright marble floors. Warm lighting. Receptionists answering phones. Morning employees arriving with coffee cups and briefcases while elevator music played softly through hidden speakers. Nina stared outward in disbelief while trembling violently on the elevator floor. Nobody looked frightened. Nobody screamed. It was as though the nightmare upstairs had never existed. A security guard rushed toward her immediately. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Nina stumbled out of the elevator shaking uncontrollably while trying desperately to explain what happened. The phones. The screaming. Lauren. The hands beneath the floor. But every word sounded insane the moment it left her mouth. Security searched the 7th floor immediately afterward. They found nothing. No damaged carpet. No signs of struggle. No missing employees. Desk 42 sat abandoned exactly as it always had beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Officially, Mercer Communications claimed Nina suffered an exhaustion-induced panic attack caused by stress and overnight work conditions. Nobody believed her story. At least not openly. But something changed inside the building after that night. Employees began quitting unexpectedly. Overnight workers refused assignments near Desk 42. Several supervisors complained about hearing phones ringing from empty cubicles after 3 a.m. despite disconnected systems. One janitor reportedly resigned after claiming he saw a woman crawling beneath the office lights late one night after everyone else had gone home. 3 months later, Mercer Communications permanently shut down the entire 7th floor. Officially due to structural concerns involving unstable flooring and electrical issues. Unofficially, workers whispered a different reason. Because every night after midnight, phones still rang upstairs in empty cubicles where no employees remained. And according to multiple security guards working overnight shifts in the building, one phone always rings longer than the others. Desk 42. Some guards claim that if you stand quietly near the elevator around 3:33 a.m., you can still hear a woman crying faintly through the ceiling above the lobby. Others report seeing computer monitors flicker on by themselves behind the locked glass doors of the abandoned floor. But the most disturbing reports come from maintenance workers assigned near the old call center. Several claim that during heavy rainstorms, water sometimes leaks upward through the carpet beneath desk 42. And if someone answers the ringing phone, the first thing they hear is a terrified woman whispering through static, "Can you hear me?" Story 4. The Highway Maintenance Crew. The desert becomes something completely different after midnight. During the daytime, the Nevada highways looked endless but harmless, miles of cracked asphalt cutting through empty land beneath burning sunlight and dry mountain air. But at night, the desert changed into something ancient and deeply unsettling. The roads felt abandoned by the world itself. No traffic. No gas stations. No lights except distant stars hanging over endless black land. The silence became so heavy you could hear your own heartbeat inside the truck cab. Wind moved through the desert in low mournful sounds that almost resembled voices if you listened too long. And once you drove far enough from civilization, the darkness stopped feeling empty. It started feeling occupied. Marcus Hill learned that during his overnight highway maintenance job. Every night, his crew drove isolated stretches of desert road repairing damaged guardrails, filling potholes, replacing warning signs, and clearing debris left behind by crashes nobody wanted to think about. The work paid well because almost nobody wanted to do it overnight. Especially in Nevada's dead stretches of highway where hours could pass without seeing another vehicle. Most nights it was just the three of them. Marcus, Eddie, Luis. Three exhausted men inside one maintenance truck crawling through endless darkness beneath cold desert skies. All three were experienced enough to know that strange things happened during overnight road work. Fatigue played tricks on your eyes. Heat mirages lingered even after sunset. Shadows moved strangely beneath headlights. But even among experienced night workers, certain places earned reputations people didn't joke about. Mile marker 117 was one of those places. Truckers whispered about it constantly at roadside diners and rest stops. According to the stories, strange things appeared there after 2 a.m. People standing motionless beside the road in the middle of nowhere. Children asking passing drivers for rides before vanishing moments later. Headlights from broken-down cars that disappeared whenever anyone stopped to help. Some truckers claimed they heard knocking on their trailer doors while driving through the area despite nobody being outside for miles. Others swore voices came through CB radios from drivers who had supposedly died years earlier in accidents near mile marker 117. Marcus ignored all of it. Highway workers always created ghost stories to survive long overnight shifts. That's what he told himself anyway. Until one freezing November night changed everything. Their maintenance truck stopped near mile marker 117 shortly after 2 a.m. to repair damaged guardrails left twisted from a recent accident. Cold desert wind swept across the highway hard enough to rattle loose metal tools inside the truck bed. The moon hung pale over endless black mountains while the empty road stretched endlessly in both directions without a single passing vehicle. No buildings anywhere. No cell signal. No lights except the maintenance truck's flashing amber beacons reflecting weakly across cracked asphalt. Beyond the road lay only black desert stretching forever beneath the stars. Marcus stepped out carrying a flashlight and repair tools while Eddie unloaded replacement rails from the truck. Luis stood near the roadside smoking quietly beneath his hooded jacket, staring out into the darkness beyond the shoulder. Everything felt unnaturally still tonight. Even the wind sounded different. Lower somehow. Hollow. At exactly 2:26 a.m., Luis suddenly froze. His cigarette slipped slowly from his fingers onto the asphalt. Marcus looked up immediately. What? Luis didn't answer at first. His face had gone pale beneath the truck lights. Do you hear that? The desert fell silent around them. Marcus listened carefully while cold wind swept across the highway. At first he heard nothing. Then it came again. Whistling. Soft. Distant. A child's tune drifting slowly through the darkness beyond the road. The melody sounded old-fashioned. Slow and uneven. Like something a child might hum while walking alone at night. Marcus immediately felt cold unease spread through his chest. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. Not for miles. Eddie muttered a curse under his breath without looking up from the truck. Get back in the truck. Luis kept staring toward the desert. You hear it too. The whistling continued. Closer now. Carried softly across the wind from somewhere beyond the roadside. The melody rose and fell strangely, sometimes sounding directly beside them before drifting far away again. Marcus grabbed his flashlight tighter and slowly turned toward the shoulder of the highway. The beam cut across dirt, rocks, and dry brush stretching into darkness. Nothing there. But the whistling didn't stop. It kept getting closer. Then Marcus noticed something moving near an old road sign about 30 yards away. His flashlight beam settled toward it slowly. And the moment the light touched the roadside, Marcus felt his stomach tighten with sudden dread. A child was standing there, motionless beside the highway. Small. Thin. Wearing pale pajamas that fluttered weakly in the cold wind. Bare feet pressed against the dirt shoulder. The boy stood completely still beneath the road sign with his face hidden in darkness. And somewhere out in the empty desert beyond him, the whistling suddenly stopped. At first Marcus saw nothing beyond the shoulder of the highway except drifting sand and dead brush twisting beneath cold desert wind. His flashlight beam swept slowly across the darkness while the empty road stretched endlessly beneath moonlight. Then the beam stopped. A little boy stood beside the highway, motionless beneath an old rusted road sign leaning crookedly toward the desert. Barefoot. Wearing faded striped pajamas that looked decades old. Maybe 8 years old at most. His pale skin almost seemed to glow faintly beneath the flashlight beam while cold wind moved softly through his dark hair. But Marcus couldn't see the child's face clearly. The boy's head remained tilted downward just enough for shadows to completely hide his eyes. Marcus felt a knot tighten immediately in his stomach. What the hell? The boy didn't answer. Slowly, he lifted one small arm and pointed farther down the highway into the darkness beyond mile marker 117. Then, without making a sound, the child stepped behind the rusted road sign. Marcus reacted instinctively and ran toward him. Hey! Gravel crunched loudly beneath his boots while his flashlight beam bounced wildly through the darkness. Kid! But the second Marcus reached the sign, his breath caught painfully in his throat. Nobody was there. The desert behind the road sign stretched completely empty beneath moonlight. No footprints. No movement. Nothing except cold wind sweeping through dead brush and miles of black open land. Marcus turned in confusion, his pulse beginning to race. Then he heard Eddie screaming. The sound tore violently through the desert silence behind him. Marcus spun around instantly toward the highway. Every maintenance truck light had gone out. The flashing amber beacons. The headlights. The work lamps. All dead. Total darkness swallowed the highway except for weak moonlight reflecting across asphalt. Marcus immediately saw Eddie and Luis standing frozen beside the truck staring down the road ahead. Then Marcus saw it too. Headlights approaching slowly through the darkness. Old yellow headlights. Dim and weak beneath drifting desert dust. An old station wagon rolled silently toward them along the empty highway. Too silently. Marcus realized immediately there was no engine sound. No tire noise. Nothing. The vehicle simply moved forward through darkness like something gliding across the road rather than driving. Marcus felt cold fear crawl slowly up his spine. The station wagon looked ancient. Rust covered the sides in dark streaks. The windshield appeared cracked badly across one corner. One headlight flickered weakly while the other glowed steadily yellow like a dying eye. The vehicle slowed as it neared the maintenance crew. Then stopped directly beside them with a long soft creak of suspension. Silence swallowed the highway again. Marcus slowly raised his flashlight toward the windows. A family sat inside the station wagon. Mother. Father. 2 children in the back seat. All perfectly motionless. None of them blinked. None of them looked toward the workers. Their skin appeared gray beneath the pale headlights like flesh drained completely of warmth and life. Marcus exchanged a nervous glance with Eddie. "What the hell?" Eddie whispered. The family continued staring forward silently through the windshield. Marcus swallowed hard and slowly approached the driver's side window. Every instinct inside him screamed not to get closer. But another part of him still tried desperately to believe this was real. Some stranded family. Some late-night accident victim. He lowered himself slightly toward the cracked driver's side glass. "You folks okay?" Nobody moved. Not even slightly. The silence around the station wagon felt suffocating now. Marcus could hear nothing except wind moving across the empty highway. Then the father slowly turned his head toward him. Marcus nearly stumbled backward in horror. The man's face was horribly mangled. One side of his skull appeared crushed inward as though smashed violently against shattered glass. Blood and dried black streaks covered his cheek and neck. Jagged fragments of windshield glass remained embedded deep in his flesh around one empty eye socket. His jaw hung slightly crooked while dead gray eyes stared directly into Marcus without blinking. In the passenger seat, the mother slowly smiled. Blood leaked steadily from the corner of her mouth, running dark across her chin and neck. Her throat appeared slit open beneath strands of wet hair. Then both children in the back seat turned toward Marcus together. Their mouths opened slowly in perfect unison. And they whispered softly through blue cracked lips. "Help us." The words sounded layered somehow. Human voices buried beneath distant static and wind. Marcus stepped backward instinctively while terror slammed hard into his chest. The little girl in the back seat raised one pale hand toward the window. Her fingers were broken backward at impossible angles. "Please," she whispered again. Then every light inside the station wagon suddenly flickered. And for one horrifying second, Marcus saw something else sitting inside the vehicle behind the family. A tall shadow occupying the entire rear cargo space. Thin black limbs folded unnaturally against the ceiling, watching him through the darkness inside the car. Then the headlights blinked once, and the shadow vanished. The family remained smiling silently inside the station wagon while cold desert wind swept across the highway around them. Somewhere far out beyond mile marker 117, the child's whistling started again. Marcus stumbled backward away from the station wagon, nearly dropping his flashlight onto the asphalt. His pulse hammered violently while the dead family continued staring at him through cracked windows. Beside the maintenance truck, Eddie suddenly shouted in panic. "That's them." Marcus turned sharply toward him. "What?" Eddie's face had gone completely pale beneath the weak moonlight. He stared at the station wagon like he recognized it. The Crash family. Cold dread spread through Marcus instantly. Louis stepped backward shakily while making the sign of the cross beneath his breath. "There was an accident here years ago," he whispered. "Whole family died near this marker." Wind swept hard across the highway, carrying the smell of dust and something older. Something rotten buried beneath the desert sand. Then the station wagon doors slowly opened together. The sound echoed softly across the empty highway like rusted metal groaning inside a grave. The family stepped out one by one. Their movements were horribly wrong. Jerky. Uneven. Bones cracked loudly inside their limbs as they straightened. The father's head twitched unnaturally sideways while shards of glass shifted visibly beneath his crushed skin. The mother stepped barefoot onto the asphalt with blood still leaking steadily from her ruined mouth. The children moved stiffly beside them, pale feet dragging slightly across the road. Then the little boy slowly raised one broken arm and pointed toward the desert again. This time Marcus saw them. Far out beyond the highway beneath pale moonlight. Hundreds of people stood silently in the sand. Motionless silhouettes stretching endlessly across the desert floor. Watching. Men. Women. Children. Shapes standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the stars without moving or speaking. Marcus suddenly realized they weren't random figures. Many looked damaged. Broken. Bodies twisted unnaturally. Some leaned sideways at impossible angles. Others appeared burned black against the moonlight. The desert was filled with them, watching the highway silently like an enormous crowd waiting for something. The dead family began walking slowly toward Marcus and the others. The children whispered repeatedly now in soft overlapping voices. "You left us here. You left us here. You left us here." Marcus backed away instinctively while terror flooded through him. "We need to go. Now." Eddie didn't argue. All three men sprinted toward the maintenance truck and threw themselves inside, slamming the doors hard enough to shake the cab. Marcus immediately twisted the ignition key. Nothing. The engine clicked weakly once before dying again. "Come on." He tried again desperately. Nothing. Outside the truck windows, movement appeared everywhere in the darkness now. More figures emerging slowly from the desert surrounding mile marker 117. Crash victims. Burned drivers with melted flesh hanging from their faces. Men with broken necks dragging unnaturally sideways. Women covered in blood and shattered glass. People missing limbs slowly limping across the asphalt toward the truck. One figure wore a motorcycle helmet split completely open down the middle. Another crawled using only his arms while the lower half of his body dragged uselessly behind him. Their dead gray faces stared blankly toward the truck as they surrounded it from every direction. Luis whispered shakily from the back seat while clutching the dashboard hard enough to whiten his knuckles. This highway was built over a mass grave. Something slammed violently against the side of the truck. The entire vehicle shook hard. Marcus jumped as another impact struck the rear door moments later. Then another. Bloody handprints smeared slowly across the windows outside. Rotting fingers dragged wet streaks down the glass while dead faces pressed closer around the truck. The little frostbitten boy from the station wagon appeared beside Marcus's window smiling softly through shattered teeth. More impacts hammered the vehicle from every direction now. Bodies slamming against metal. Hands clawing desperately at the doors. The dead completely surrounded them. And then everything stopped. Instantly. Silence swallowed the highway. Every dead figure froze motionless outside the truck. The crash victims slowly turned away from the vehicle together. All of them stared silently toward the desert horizon. Marcus noticed something horrifying immediately. Fear. The dead looked afraid. Even through ruined faces and broken bodies, terror spread visibly across them. The child's whistling returned through the darkness. Closer now. Slow and uneven beneath the cold wind. The dead figures surrounding the truck began backing away gradually from the road. Some whimpered softly. Others shook violently. The station wagon family retreated together toward the desert shoulder while staring outward into the darkness beyond the highway. Then Marcus saw it approaching. At first it looked like a tall shadow moving through the desert. But as it neared the highway, moonlight revealed its true shape. The thing was impossibly tall. At least 8 feet high. Maybe more. Its body stretched unnaturally thin beneath long strips of black fabric that fluttered silently in the wind like funeral cloth. Its arms hung nearly to the ground, too long for any human body, ending in fingers that resembled blackened branches. The creature moved without sound. Not walking normally. Gliding somehow between the dead figures standing frozen around the road. And where its face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes. No mouth. No skin. Just darkness. A hollow black void beneath the hood-like folds of fabric. The dead crash victims began screaming. Not at Marcus. Not at the truck. At the creature. High terrified screams echoed across the desert while broken bodies stumbled backward desperately trying to escape it. But the tall figure moved silently among them without rushing. Calm. Patient. One burned driver reached toward Marcus's truck as though begging for help. The creature touched him lightly with one impossibly long hand. And the dead man vanished instantly. No sound. No blood. Just gone. Another crash victim tried crawling away across the asphalt. The creature's shadow passed over her body. She disappeared too. One by one, the dead figures vanished wherever the tall thing touched them. Erased completely from existence beneath the endless desert sky. And all the while, The whistling continued softly from somewhere inside the darkness where its face should have been. The little ghost boy slowly raised one pale broken arm and pointed directly at Marcus inside the truck cab. The tall creature stopped moving instantly. Silence crushed the desert highway again. Then, very slowly, the thing turned toward the maintenance truck. Marcus felt something inside himself collapse the moment the faceless darkness beneath its hood faced him completely. This wasn't ordinary fear anymore. It wasn't panic. It was something deeper. Older. Primal survival horror buried inside human instinct since the beginning of time. Every nerve in Marcus's body screamed the same impossible truth at once: this thing should not exist. The creature stood motionless beneath moonlight while black fabric drifted softly around its impossibly thin body. No eyes were visible inside the darkness where its face should have been, yet Marcus knew with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at him. Studying him. Choosing. Then the maintenance truck engine roared to life by itself. The sudden sound nearly made Marcus scream. Eddie reacted instantly, slamming the accelerator to the floor while sobbing curses under his breath. The truck shot forward violently down the empty highway, tires screeching across asphalt while desert darkness swallowed mile marker 117 behind them. Marcus twisted around in his seat desperately, staring through the rear windshield as the truck sped away. The creature remained standing in the middle of the highway far behind them, motionless beneath pale moonlight. Yet somehow, it was getting closer. Marcus felt his stomach twist painfully. The thing never moved. It simply stood there impossibly far away while growing larger in the rearview mirror with every passing second. Closer. Closer. Without walking. Without running. Like distance itself no longer mattered to it. Eddie gripped the steering wheel so tightly his hands bled against cracked leather. "Don't look at it," he shouted through panicked sobs. But Marcus couldn't stop staring. The creature now filled most of the rear windshield despite the truck racing down the highway at nearly 90 miles an hour. The black void beneath its hood seemed deeper now somehow. Endless. Then the truck radio activated suddenly with a violent burst of static. Both men jumped. Static hissed loudly through the cab speakers before a voice whispered softly through the interference. "You stopped where it feeds." The voice sounded layered. Human words buried beneath distant screaming and childlike whistling. Marcus grabbed the radio desperately. "Who is this?" Silence answered him for one terrible second. Then the rear windshield exploded inward. Glass erupted through the truck cab in a violent shower while freezing wind screamed inside. Louise screamed from the back seat. Marcus spun around instantly in horror. Black hands had erupted through the shattered rear window. Not human hands. Long black limbs made entirely of darkness clawed around Luis's body while dragging him violently backward toward the broken glass. Luis screamed in absolute terror while desperately clawing at the seats. "Help me!" Marcus lunged across the cab and grabbed Luis's arm with both hands. The skin felt ice cold already. "Hold on." Luis's face twisted in pure panic as the black hands pulled harder. More arms emerged from the darkness outside the truck now. Too many arms. Thin endless black limbs wrapping around Luis's torso, legs, throat. Marcus pulled with everything he had while Eddie screamed and fought to control the fishtailing truck. Then Luis suddenly stopped screaming. His expression changed instantly from terror to something worse. Recognition. like he had seen something outside the shattered window that broke his mind completely. Luis opened his mouth slowly. Oh God! The blackness outside the truck surged violently inward. Marcus felt Luis's arm rip free from his grip. And then Luis vanished. Gone. No blood. No body. No sound except howling wind screaming through the shattered rear window. 1 second he existed. The next, nothing remained except darkness rushing beside the speeding truck. Marcus collapsed backward in shock while Eddie sobbed uncontrollably behind the wheel. The truck fishtailed violently across the empty highway before straightening again. Behind them in the desert, something huge now moved alongside the truck. Marcus only saw pieces of it whenever moonlight briefly touched the darkness beyond the road. Long skeletal limbs pounding silently through sand. Massive black shapes shifting just beyond visibility. Too many arms unfolding from impossible angles. Sometimes he glimpsed pale faces buried inside the darkness running beside it. Sometimes only endless moving shadow. But no matter how fast Eddie drove, the thing kept pace effortlessly beside them through the desert. The child's whistling echoed constantly outside the truck now. Closer than ever. Marcus pressed himself against the passenger door while gripping the dashboard hard enough to numb his fingers. Faster. Eddie pushed the truck harder. The speedometer climbed dangerously high while the desert blurred into endless darkness around them. The county line appeared ahead just before sunrise, a faded road sign illuminated weakly by approaching dawn. The moment the truck crossed it, everything stopped instantly. Silence. The whistling vanished. The massive shape running beside the truck disappeared completely. Marcus looked wildly through the shattered rear windshield. Nothing followed them anymore. No creature. No ghosts. No station wagon. Only empty desert highway stretching endlessly beneath pale early morning light. Eddie slowly pulled the truck onto the roadside shoulder while shaking uncontrollably. Both men sat there gasping for breath as sunrise crawled weakly over distant mountains. Luis was gone. Completely gone. Search teams later combed the desert for nearly a week after Marcus and Eddie reported the incident. Authorities eventually concluded Luis suffered a psychological breakdown during overnight work and wandered into the desert after the truck stopped near mile marker 117. No body was ever found. No footprints. No trace he had existed beyond the statements from Marcus and Eddie. Officially, the state classified the case as a missing person incident caused by stress and environmental exposure. Marcus and Eddie never worked overnight highway maintenance again. Eddie reportedly developed severe panic attacks whenever driving through open desert after dark. Marcus moved out of Nevada entirely less than a year later. But stories about mile marker 117 still circulate among truckers crossing the Nevada highways late at night. Drivers continue reporting strange sightings after 2 a.m. near the old guardrails where the maintenance crew stopped. Some claim they see figures standing silently beside the road asking for help before vanishing into darkness. Others report hearing childlike whistling through open windows while driving through the area. But the most disturbing stories all describe the same thing. A highway maintenance truck parked along the roadside beneath flashing amber lights. 3 workers standing nearby waving desperately for passing drivers to stop. One of them always appears to be a Hispanic man covered in dirt and blood. And according to every witness who has seen them, the workers look terrified. Like they're trying to warn people away from something standing out in the desert behind them. Truckers now avoid stopping anywhere near mile marker 117 after midnight. Because the few who ignored the warnings and pulled over to help reportedly never reached the next town. Sometimes their abandoned vehicles are found days later sitting empty beside the highway with the engines still running. Doors wide open. And long black handprints smeared across the inside of the windows. Night shifts change people. Anyone who has worked through enough long nights eventually understands that. Maybe it's the exhaustion slowly eating away at your ability to think clearly at 3 a.m. Maybe it's the isolation that comes from being one of the only people awake while the rest of the world sleeps peacefully behind locked doors. Or maybe it's something far worse. Maybe there are things in this world that only come out after midnight. Things that wait patiently in places humans were never meant to stay too long after dark. In silent hospital corridors where fluorescent lights hum above empty wheelchairs. On endless desert highways where no headlights pass for hours. Inside abandoned office floors glowing faintly with dead computer screens. At forgotten train stations swallowed by fog and pine forests. Watching. Waiting. Listening for the sound of tired footsteps and lonely voices during those forbidden hours between midnight and sunrise. Because there's something deeply unnatural about the world at 3 a.m. The air feels different. Heavier somehow. Buildings creak in ways they never do during daylight. Hallways stretch longer. Shadows stop looking empty. And silence itself begins to feel alive. Night shift workers know this better than anyone. Security guards sitting alone beneath flickering cameras. Dispatchers listening to static through dead radio channels. Truck drivers crossing empty highways under black skies. Office employees staring at glowing screens while entire buildings stand abandoned around them. People who spend enough nights awake eventually begin noticing things they wish they hadn't. A voice whispering through a disconnected phone line. Footsteps echoing in sealed hallways. Faces appearing briefly in dark windows where nobody should be standing. The sound of breathing when no one else is there. And the truly terrifying part is this: exhaustion makes you doubt yourself. You tell yourself you imagined it. That stress is playing tricks on your mind. That the shadow at the end of the hallway was only bad lighting. That the crying you heard through the office walls was probably pipes or wind or faulty wiring. But deep down, some part of you knows better. Some part of you understands that certain places hold on to things. Pain. Fear. Death. Loneliness. And after enough nights pass, those things begin to wake up. Maybe that's why hospitals feel colder after midnight. Maybe that's why abandoned stations still echo with sounds long after the trains stop running. Maybe that's why some office buildings refuse to stay empty no matter how many lights you turn off. Or maybe humans simply were never meant to witness these hours. Maybe the world after midnight belongs to something else entirely. Something older than us. Something patient. Something hiding just beyond the reach of flickering lights and rearview mirrors, waiting for tired workers unlucky enough to still be awake when the rest of humanity is sleeping. So if you ever find yourself working late at night, and the silence suddenly starts feeling too heavy around you, if a phone rings where no phone should exist, if someone whispers your name through static, if you hear footsteps following you in an empty hallway, or if you see a figure standing motionless beneath distant lights on a lonely road, trust your instincts. Do not investigate every sound. Do not answer every call. And if something deep inside you suddenly tells you to leave, leave immediately. Because some night shifts do not end when the sun rises. Some places remember the people who suffered there. Some roads lead somewhere they shouldn't. And some things waiting in the darkness after midnight are still searching for someone to stay with them forever. So tonight, when the clock reads 3 a.m., and your room falls completely silent for just a little too long, listen carefully. Because somewhere out there, another phone is ringing. Another train is arriving. Another empty hallway is waiting. And something in the dark may already know you're awake. For night shifts. For people who clocked in and never came back the same. And 3 hours later, you're still here. But here is the thing about the places we visited tonight. They don't close when we stop talking about them. Right now, as the rain falls outside your window, a phone is ringing inside room 317 at St. Augustine Medical Center. One sharp ring at exactly 3:11 a.m. The corridor lights are dim. The elevator button for the 3rd floor is already glowing red. And somewhere deep in the east wing, behind a door that has been sealed for over a year, she is still waiting for someone to answer. Right now, somewhere in the Oregon mountains, fog is rolling back across the tracks at Ashbrook Station. The platform speaker is crackling softly by itself. And out in the darkness beyond the trees, something massive is moving through the forest. Ancient wheels grinding slowly against rails that no longer exist. Dim yellow headlights cutting through the mist, now arriving. Train 66. Right now, on the 7th floor of a building in downtown Atlanta, a monitor at desk 42 has switched itself on in an empty locked office. The screen shows one message glowing softly in the darkness. Can you hear me? She's been asking since 2019. Nobody has ever answered. And right now, at mile marker 117 on a Nevada highway, the dead are standing at the side of the road again. A little boy in old striped pajamas. A family in a rusted station wagon. Hundreds of crash victims arranged across the desert floor. And somewhere between them, moving without sound through the darkness, something impossibly tall is walking slowly between the headlights. Still feeding. Still patient. Still choosing. The night shift never truly ends. Not for the people who worked it. Not for the places that held them. And not for whatever has been waiting in those places since long before any of us were born. If tonight kept you company through 6 hours of darkness, through the hospital, through the station, through the call center and the desert highway, then do something for this channel before you go. Leave a like. One tap. It puts this video in front of the next person who will be awake alone at 3 a.m. tonight staring at the ceiling wondering why the hallway outside feels different than it did at midnight. Subscribe if you haven't already. And press the bell icon, because next week, we go back in. More Indian urban legends that the English-speaking world has never heard. More Professor Arjun investigations. More places people refuse to enter after dark. More stories that were buried for a reason. Drop a comment. Tell me which shift haunted you most. The hospital call. The last train. The call center floor. The highway at mile marker 117. Tell me which story you'll be thinking about the next time you're awake past midnight and the building around you goes too quiet. I read every comment. Every single one. And when you're ready for more, the playlists are waiting. Hours of Rain Horror. Indian Urban Legends. Sleep Compilations. Paranormal Investigations. Videos buried deep in this channel that have been sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for someone to press play. They've been patient. They've learned patience from the things they describe. One last thing. Before you close this video, before you put down your phone or your headphones, before you try to sleep, listen to the room around you. Not because something's there, in the silence, just before it stops. Until next time, keep your doors locked, keep the rain outside, and remember, some jobs should never be done after midnight, and some things waiting in the dark have been there a very long time.